If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1. Don't use your mobile phone while walking. Rhodes' head felt dizzy, and a dull ache spread through his arms and thighs, as if he had been hit by a runaway cart. He still remembered being attacked by wild beasts, yet strangely, he hadn't been eaten. At least, not yet. Slowly, Rhodes opened his eyes, expecting to see an unfamiliar ceiling, but instead, he was greeted by the bright glare of the sun. His eyes instinctively narrowed, and he reflexively tried to lift his hand to shield them. Swish! A soft sound echoed as someone carefully closed the curtains, easing the strain on his eyes. Judging by the time, he should be waking up soon. Rhodes heard an elderly woman's voice speaking nearby, but he didn't understand a word of it. It didn't sound like English or any other familiar language either. Tilting his head slightly, he spotted an old woman with pink hair and a distinctive red cloak standing by the window. She was likely the one who had spoken just now. "How do you feel?" A warm, kind voice came from the other side of the room. Turning his gaze, Rhodes saw an old man wearing a distinctive jester-like hat, seated cross-legged in a chair beside the bed. Of course, Rhodes didn't understand him either. His throat felt dry as he struggled to speak. Where is this?" The two elderly figures exchanged glances, clear confusion on their faces. They didn't understand a word he had said. Rhodes frowned, thinking for a moment before trying again. "Where am I? Who are you? Is this even working?" But as he watched their expressions grow even more bewildered, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. "I tried English, nothing. Cantonese? Still nothing. Even my broken attempts at other languages, no response. Just what language are they speaking? And more importantly, how the hell am I supposed to communicate?" Before he could panic further, the old man in the jester hat suddenly hopped off his chair with surprising agility. It was only then that Rhodes realized something: this man had been standing on the chair the whole time. A stray thought surfaced in his mind. Isn't it rude to think about someone's height? He mentally scolded himself, before noticing something else. Despite his elderly appearance, the short man moved with remarkable ease, not at all like someone his age. "It looks like there's a language barrier. That's a bit troublesome," the old man muttered, scratching his head. "A language I've never heard before," the pink-haired woman mused before turning toward him. "Where exactly did you pick this child up?" "The forest," the old man replied. "I told you already, didn't I?" Just then, a knock came at the wooden door. A young woman, probably around 17 or 18, stepped inside. "Master, it's about time to leave. If we don't head out now, we might miss the regular meeting." "Ah, I almost forgot." The old man, who Rhodes was starting to suspect was someone important, glanced at the pink-haired woman. "Poor Lyusika, could I trouble you to look after him for now?" "I refuse." Poor Lyusika didn't even hesitate. "I despise humans, Makarov. Besides, it's noisy here." Yet despite her blunt words, she was already moving toward Rhodes, helping him sit up. Without a word, she poured a glass of water and handed it to him. "Thank you," Rhodes said instinctively. Poor Lyusika may not have understood the words, but she could guess his meaning. Still, she didn't respond, simply turning on her heel and walking toward the door. "His injuries are no longer serious. I'm leaving," she announced. "Ah, thank you." Makarov sighed, clearly familiar with his old friend's temperament. There was no point trying to convince her otherwise. Rhodes took a sip of water, soothing his parched throat, then watched in confusion as the pink-haired woman exited the room. Meanwhile, Makarov and the young woman had begun talking again, though their conversation was still in the unfamiliar language. From the occasional glances they threw in his direction, Rhodes had the distinct feeling that they were discussing him. Just then, a sharp pain flared in his left leg, making him wince. He shifted slightly and noticed that his left arm and waist were wrapped in bandages. Raising a hand to his forehead, he realized that it, too, was carefully bandaged. The injuries across his body pulled his memories into focus. That's right, the attack. Something about all this felt strange. Before everything went dark, Rhodes clearly remembered waking up that morning, refusing to get out of bed because he and his roommate had stayed up way too late gaming. One by one, Rhodes' roommates disappeared. First, one went out to grab some food and never returned. Then the second followed, only to vanish without a trace as well. Left with no choice and an increasingly loud stomach, Rhodes finally dragged his last remaining roommate along to go search for them. They decided to split up. One would check the new cafeteria, the other the old one. Rhodes took the latter route. Unfortunately, his journey was cut short when, distracted by his phone, he tripped going up the steps and face-planted spectacularly. By the time he scrambled back to his feet, the familiar surroundings of his university were gone. In their place was an endless, towering forest. What do you do when you suddenly find yourself in a completely unfamiliar place? Don't panic. First, check your phone's GPS to determine your location. If necessary, make an emergency call. Except Rhodes' phone was nowhere to be found. When he fell, it must have gone flying. A creeping unease settled in his chest. Something wasn't right. Is this one of those weird, unexplainable phenomena? There was once a documentary on magical archives about cases of people mysteriously vanishing, only to reappear miles away with no recollection of how they got there. Rhodes had always dismissed those stories as nonsense. But now? He wasn't so sure. Worst case scenario, he hadn't just ended up in another city, he was in an entirely different world. A horrifying thought struck him. What if the other two vanished for the same reason? Regardless, standing around wouldn't solve anything. He needed to find people and ask for help. Taking a deep breath, Rhodes forced himself to focus. After scanning his surroundings, he noticed a faint path to the west, flattened grass, as if something had passed through recently. Following that logic, he started walking. That turned out to be a terrible mistake. Only a few minutes in, he stumbled upon something he really wished he hadn't. A massive beast easily the size of an elephant lay resting in the clearing ahead. Its spotted fur was unlike anything he had ever seen, a strange mix between a bear's bulky frame and the distinct snout and hooves of a wild boar. Rhodes barely had time to react before the creature stirred. It opened one eye. Then the other. Then it stood. The earth trembled beneath its weight, the sheer pressure of its presence sending a shiver down Rhodes' spine. Panic surged in his chest, but instinct took over. Grabbing the nearest sturdy branch, he held it up in what he hoped was a threatening manner. The beast was not impressed. With a deep, guttural growl, it lunged. The moment it struck, Rhodes' makeshift weapon snapped like a twig. A powerful impact sent him flying, pain exploding in his ribs as the world spun violently out of control. As his vision darkened, the last thing he heard was the chaotic symphony of the wild, the screeches of birds, the distant howls of wolves, the rhythmic croaks of frogs, and the deep, bone-rattling roar of something far more terrifying. Rhodes woke with a start. His head throbbed. His limbs ached. But he was alive. Did someone save me? Just as he was piecing things together, a gentle voice pulled him from his thoughts. Hi there. Blinking, Rhodes looked up to see the girl who had entered earlier. She wore a deep red dress, the color complementing her long, silvery white hair that cascaded elegantly down her back. The bangs framing her forehead were gathered into a small, tied-up tuft on top of her head, giving her a slightly playful appearance. Her delicate features held warmth, her kind smile radiating an undeniable sense of reassurance. No matter where she went, this girl would undoubtedly attract attention both for her beauty and for the warm, gentle aura she carried. Rhodes couldn't understand what she was saying, but judging by the way she waved, she was probably greeting him, right? Hello, Rhodes greeted her hesitantly. His uncertainty didn't seem to bother her. Instead, she responded with a bright smile, one that slightly eased the nervousness building inside him. Just as Makarov had suspected, the girl gave him a look that practically said, I knew it. Unfortunately, I have no idea what you're saying, she admitted with a small sigh. You must be feeling pretty lost and confused right now, hey? She paused for a moment, then smiled apologetically. Not that you'd understand that either anyway, the master had to step out for a while, so he asked me to look after you in the meantime. She attempted to communicate with gestures, but it wasn't very effective. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Oh, right. I haven't introduced myself yet. She pointed at herself, speaking slowly and clearly. I'm Mirajane. Rhodes hesitated for a moment before mimicking her pronunciation. Mirajane. Mirajane's smile grew even brighter. That's right. Mirajane. Her cheerful demeanor was oddly infectious, and Rhodes found himself repeating the name after her, his pronunciation improving each time. Mirajane, he finally said properly. Good. She nodded encouragingly. Then, she pointed to herself again. Mirajane. Next, she pointed at him. And you? Rhodes immediately understood what she meant. He pointed at himself and answered, Rhodes. Lord. Mirajane repeated, tilting her head slightly. Rhodes, he corrected himself, mimicking the way she had adjusted his pronunciation earlier. It wasn't much, but it was a start. With a warm smile, Mirajane extended her hand. Nice to meet you, Rhodes. Rhodes hesitated for a moment before gently clasping her fingertips. Nice, to meet you. Mirajane. He had tried to repeat the phrase exactly, but he stumbled over the words, failing to grasp their full meaning. Then growling. Rhodes' stomach let out a loud and very inappropriate growl. He stiffened, awkwardly holding his stomach, unsure of what to say. Mirajane giggled knowingly. Ah, I understand that language just fine. Wait here for a moment. She motioned for him to stay put, then turned and left the room. Rhodes watched her go before reaching for the cup of water on the bedside table. Taking a small sip, he began sorting through the memories of what had happened to him. First, there was the sudden appearance of the massive forest, then the encounter with that strange beast, and finally, the people he met upon waking up. The language barrier made it difficult to understand them, but one thing was certain: this was not the world he knew. Not even close. Rhodes wanted answers. How long had he been unconscious? What happened while he was out? Where exactly was he? And, most importantly, was there a way to get back home? But without even the most basic means of communication, he had no way to ask these questions. Frustrating. Sighing, he pulled back the blanket covering him. His left leg still ached, but he could move it, meaning the injury wasn't too severe. It's best if you don't move around too much. Even though you probably don't understand me. Mirajane had returned, balancing a tray in her hands. She placed it gently on the bedside table and made a small gesture, signaling for him to eat. On the tray sat a glass of warm milk and 2 neatly prepared sandwiches. The triangular slices of bread were cut cleanly, with layers of crisp lettuce, fresh tomato, and thinly sliced ham stacked between them. The vibrant colors made the meal look incredibly appetizing. Rhodes hesitantly picked up one of the sandwiches, then glanced at Mirajane, silently asking for confirmation. She smiled and nodded encouragingly. That was all the permission his growling stomach needed. Taking a bite, he was met with the soft, slightly sweet taste of the bread, followed by the smooth, savory flavor of the ham. The tomatoes were a little too tangy for his liking, and the sauce was unexpectedly sweet, making the taste somewhat unusual. But the fresh crunch of the lettuce balanced it out, adding a refreshing contrast. As he swallowed the first bite, a simple yet profound realization settled in. I'm alive. After that, there was no time for appreciation. He devoured the sandwich, barely chewing, stuffing bite after bite into his mouth like a starving beast. By the time he finished the first sandwich, his hunger had eased significantly. He reached for the glass of milk, feeling its warmth through the glass. It was obvious it had been intentionally heated. She must be someone who's really good at taking care of others. Rhodes cast a grateful look at Mirajane. She simply smiled, watching quietly as he ate. Chapter 2, Fairy Tale. After clearing the dishes, Mirajane left the room. A few minutes later, she returned with someone else. It was a man with a rather unusual physique. His body was as round as a giant ball, yet his limbs were oddly thin. Even stranger, his face wasn't fat at all, creating a bizarre sense of imbalance. Rhodes couldn't help but be suspicious. From all the detective shows he had watched, he had a sudden, ridiculous thought: was this guy even real? This is Rhodes, Mirajane introduced, enunciating each syllable carefully. Rhodes Jonat. Rhodes repeated it after her, and Rhodes greeted him in return. By this point, Rhodes had noticed something odd. Every single person he had met since waking up had a strikingly unique appearance. Their features and styles were so distinct that it was impossible to forget them. Rhodes, noticing Rhodes' confusion, suddenly pulled out a paintbrush and sketchpad. Then, to Rhodes' complete shock, he started drawing on his own round belly. The first sketch was of Rhodes, followed by a smaller figure of the old man from earlier. And then, the drawing suddenly sprang to life. Rhodes' eyes widened as the little figures jumped off Rhodes' body and started moving on their own. Wait, what? He blurted out. Did I just walk into a magic storybook? The scene continued to unfold. Rhodes kept drawing, and a forest appeared. 2 tiny figures were placed within it. The sketched version of Rhodes collapsed onto the ground. The old man reached out, picked him up, and carried him away. Next, the pink-haired woman entered the scene, tending to Rhodes with medicine. After that, Rhodes woke up, and then Mirajane appeared, just like in real life. Rhodes sat there in stunned silence. It finally made sense. Rhodes was using his magic to visually explain what had happened. It was an incredibly effective way to communicate. But at the same time, it was completely insane. If this isn't some kind of high-tech hologram projection, then it has to be magic, Rhodes thought to himself. The tiny, animated figures finished their reenactment and, with a simple wave of Rhodes' brush, melted into colorful puddles before flying back onto the sketchpad. Rhodes then flipped through his drawings and pulled out a few sheets, handing them to Rhodes. The first was a map. It clearly marked the dense forest where Rhodes had been found, as well as his current location. The second was a detailed sketch of a wooden building, which seemed to be the very house he was in now. The third, however, was a large group portrait. Rhodes stared at it for a long time. He easily spotted Makarov, Mirajane, and Rhodes among the crowd. Then his eyes drifted further. His breath caught. Natsu. Urza. Grey. Fairy tale. Rhodes murmured in disbelief. It seemed impossible, but the truth was staring him right in the face. Now everything made sense. The giant beast he had encountered, Rhodes' magic, the wild variety of colorful hair and striking features of the people he had met so far. This really was the world of fairy tale. But of all places, why here? If he had been thrown into One Piece or Naruto, he would have had a better grasp of what was happening. But fairy tale? His knowledge of this world was practically non-existent. The only reason he even recognized Natsu, Urza, and Grey was because his roommate had plastered fairy tale posters all over their dorm room. Other than them, Wendy, and Lucy who weren't in the picture, he barely knew anything about this world. Mirajane tilted her head as she observed his reaction. What's wrong? Do you recognize someone in the picture? Rhodes looked at her but didn't respond right away. Mirajane sighed. Oh, right. I forgot again. She smiled apologetically. If only Levy were here. She might actually be able to understand what you're saying. Rhodes thought for a moment. Can't you use Warren's magic to communicate with him? Mirajane shook her head. Even Warren's telepathy magic only transmits thoughts. If he doesn't understand the language, it won't make a difference. Rhodes nodded in understanding. Then, why don't we just teach him our language directly? Mirajane nodded. This is the only option for now. It might not be the most efficient, but hopefully, Levy can find another way. If you need my help, just say the word, Rhodes said, raising his paintbrush as if to demonstrate. His animated illustrations could bring any lesson to life, turning them into three-dimensional animations. Well, I'll be counting on you then, Rhodes. Rhodes' literacy lessons began soon after. His emotions were complicated. Even if he could return to school, what would he even do? He was stranded in a world where giant monsters roamed freely, and luck might not save him the next time he ran into one. For now, there was no point worrying. Since these people seemed friendly and willing to help, he decided to follow their lead. Besides, if they were friends of the protagonist, they were probably trustworthy. Once he realized they wanted to teach him how to read and speak, Rhodes became more proactive. No matter what he planned to do next, the first step was solving the language barrier. Mirajane pulled out a textbook from somewhere, a children's literacy book, judging by the simple letters and illustrations. She began teaching him the basics, using it as a reference. To assist with her lessons, she wielded a magical pen that could write glowing letters in midair, each shimmering with different colors. Seeing Rhodes' fascination, Mirajane smiled and handed him one of the pens. She even went out for a moment to borrow another, then patiently showed him how to use it step by step. Rhodes suspected she had already figured something out. He had never seen magic before. What surprised him was that magic tools could be used by people who didn't understand magic. Holding the pen in his hand, he had a ridiculous thought. Wait, if I can use this, does that mean I technically count as a wizard now? Perhaps because he had nothing better to do, Rhodes found himself surprisingly focused. His literacy lessons progressed quickly, and before long, he had grasped the basic syllables of the language. Next came learning actual words. However, Mirajane seemed to be quite busy. Every so often, guild members would approach her with paperwork, needing something signed or stamped. Unfortunately, Rhodes couldn't read the writing yet, so he had no idea what any of it said. Some people came and left in a hurry, while others lingered, curiously glancing at him and asking questions. Mirajane patiently explained the situation to each of them, introducing their names to Rhodes as well. It was a kind gesture, but there were so many people. Without understanding the meaning behind the words, trying to memorize names by sound alone was nearly impossible. And the more people showed up, the more awkward Rhodes started to feel. At first, he was grateful for Mirajane's kindness. But as guild members continued flocking to her, he realized he was taking up a lot of her time. For some reason, that made him feel embarrassed. Rhodes realized he had probably disrupted Mirajane's work, causing some inconvenience for others as well. However, Mirajane didn't seem to mind. After all, Makarov had personally assigned her to take care of him. Besides, guild members were only coming to her for task registrations, and the infirmary wasn't far from the main hall. Once people understood the situation, they didn't seem to care too much. I. Mirajane patiently taught Rhodes word by word, and he followed along like a child learning to speak for the first time. She pointed at her eyes. Eyes. I. Look. As Rhodes repeated the words, he found himself staring into Mirajane's eyes. At first, he thought her pupils were black, but upon closer inspection, he realized they were actually a soft shade of light blue. Her signature double eyelids made her eyes look big and expressive. Her eyelashes weren't particularly long, but they were perfectly balanced, enhancing her natural beauty. Her eyebrows had a gentle downward curve, giving her a warm and kind appearance. Yet, the slight droop at the corners of her eyes carried a hint of melancholy. But when she smiled, her eyes curled into delicate crescents, making her look even more approachable. Rhodes. Ah, sorry. Rhodes quickly snapped out of his daze, realizing he had been staring. It's fine, Mirajane reassured him with a gentle smile. Looks like we've been at this for a while. She checked the time before rising to her feet. Wait here for a moment. I'll get some food. She repeated the phrase again while gesturing, making sure Rhodes could understand. Rhodes managed to pick up a word or two, and by following her gestures, he could roughly guess her meaning. Only then did he notice how dark the sky had gotten. Without realizing it, he had spent half the day in what felt like an extended foreign language class. Back in school, language lessons always felt slow and tedious. But now? Time had flown by. Maybe it was because he really had nothing else to do. The second meal he had in this world turned out to be a large bowl of steaming ramen. The bowl itself was white porcelain with strange red patterns decorating its outer rim. The chopsticks were simple, brown, and judging from their texture and weight, likely made of ordinary wood. But the real focus was the contents of the bowl. Thin noodles glistened in a rich broth, topped with dark red slices of pork, a soft poached egg with a golden yolk, fresh green cabbage leaves, and finely chopped scallions. The beautiful presentation alone was enough to whet his appetite. Rhodes picked up his chopsticks and lifted a generous portion of noodles, but after thinking about it, he loosened his grip, leaving only half. He didn't want to look too messy while eating. Blowing gently on the steaming noodles, he inhaled the savory aroma. His mouth watered before he even took a bite. As soon as the noodles touched his tongue, he was instantly impressed. The texture was firm yet smooth, bouncy but not tough. Whoever had made these noodles knew exactly what they were doing. Still, he couldn't help but think this would be perfect with a bit of garlic. Not that it mattered. The soft, juicy, slightly sweet pork balanced out the flavors beautifully. The poached egg was cooked to perfection. One bite into the yolk gave him one taste, but letting the other half soak into the broth gave him another. Between bites, he added a piece of tender yet slightly crispy cabbage, clearing his palate before diving back in. Before long, Rhodes had forgotten all about eating with manners. He slurped down the noodles enthusiastically, savoring every bite. Once he finished, he didn't forget to take a few sips of the clear broth. It was pure, light, and comforting, seasoned just right. With a satisfied sigh, he set his chopsticks down. A thin layer of sweat had formed on his forehead, and the lingering warmth in his belly filled him with a deep sense of happiness. That was amazing. Thank you. As long as you liked it. Mirajane chuckled as she placed a glass of water on the bedside table and took away the empty ramen bowl. When Mirajane returned, she was carrying a small bag. Beside her stood a large man. He wore a dark blue high-collared coat, and through the open collar, Rhodes could see a tattoo on the left side of his neck. It was the same emblem that had been on the ramen bowl earlier, only in black. That's when Rhodes finally realized. It was the fairy tale guild mark. Come to think of it, he hadn't noticed if Mirajane had one. This is Elfman, my brother, Mirajane introduced. Rhodes took in the man's features. Elfman had a scar at the corner of his right eye, giving him a slightly intimidating look, even though he wasn't trying to appear menacing. Rhodes committed his name to memory but didn't immediately understand the word brother. Still, given Elfman's expression and the fact that he had the same white hair as Mirajane, it wasn't hard to figure out. They were siblings. Chapter 3, Where's the person who was attacked by a dragon? Elfman arrived, pushing a wheelchair. Under Mirajane's instruction, he helped Rhodes into the wheelchair and began pushing him around the guild for a small tour. Rhodes felt like he could probably walk on his own, but his left leg still ached. Since it was a kind gesture, he decided to accept it. The first place Elfman took him was the bathroom. Rhodes felt a little awkward but appreciated the thoughtfulness. He did, in fact, need to take care of some necessities. The guild was fully equipped with everything one might need: bathrooms, showers, an infirmary, a library, and even a kitchen. If necessary, someone could easily live here as their home. Afterward, Elfman wheeled Rhodes through the corridor and brought him to the heart of the guild's activity, the mission hall, which also doubled as a tavern. The hall was spacious, with over 20 long tables in the center, round tables along the edges, and a row of stools lined up at the front bar. The space was large enough to accommodate hundreds of people drinking and celebrating together. Since it was late, the once lively and bustling tavern had quieted down. Only one girl remained inside, moving tables and chairs into place. She had short purple hair tied with a large red bow. Mirajane waved at her. Thanks for your hard work, Lockie. Has everyone gone home? Yeah, they all left. It was pretty busy today, but at least there weren't any fights, Lockie responded while sliding a chair under the table. I'm heading home soon. I need a bath to cool off and wash away the dust. Elfman, who had long been used to Lockie's way of speaking, translated, she means she wants to take a shower. Mirajane chuckled. Sorry about today. The master had something for me to do, so I left the tavern in your hands. It's fine. If it was something the master asked, then I can't complain, Lockie said, finally turning to Rhodes. She narrowed her eyes slightly, giving him a curious look. He's kind of handsome. Who is he? I'm not entirely sure myself, Mirajane admitted with an apologetic smile. I'm still in the process of teaching him the common language. Sounds like a hassle. Lockie shrugged, placing the last chair into position. Well, I'll be heading out. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow, Mirajane responded warmly. Most guild members left for home at night, but Rhodes' situation was different. He obviously needed to stay. Leaving him alone wasn't an option, so Mirajane and Elfman decided to stay as well. After finishing the short tour of the guild, Rhodes followed Mirajane for another language lesson. During the lesson, he noticed something interesting: there were no electrical appliances anywhere. The lamps on the tables and walls were oil lamps or candles. Yet, he distinctly remembered seeing a ceiling fan in the tavern earlier. What was powering it? Magic? As he pondered this, Elfman excused himself, probably to gather whatever he needed for the night. That night, Rhodes slept alone in the infirmary while Mirajane and Elfman found another room to rest. Good night. I'll be in the room next door. Just call my name if you need anything, Mirajane said, making sure to use words and gestures so Rhodes could understand. Thank you. It was one of the few phrases he had learned, and he had already repeated it countless times today. As the lights dimmed, the soft glow of the crescent moon filtered through the window, casting silver beams across the room. Rhodes leaned against the headboard, gazing out the window. No sudden flashes of car headlights. No roaring engines. No endless hum of air conditioners. So many things he used to find annoying were gone. Yet, for some reason, he didn't feel happy. Outside lay a world completely unfamiliar to him. When people have too much time to think, their minds tend to wander. Curiosity and fear about the unknown, anticipation and unease about an unfamiliar environment. During the day, when Mirajane, Rhodes, Elfman, and the others were around, those thoughts didn't feel so overwhelming. But at night, when the lights went out and he was left alone in the darkness, they crept up on him uncontrollably. Can I go back? Or will I be stuck here forever? What will my future even look like? Before Rhodes could spiral too deep into his thoughts, a cheerful voice snapped him back to reality. Good morning. Did you sleep well last night? Good morning. The truth was, Rhodes hadn't slept well at all. But when someone came to check on him so early in the morning, he forced himself to act more energetic. Not that it mattered, his exhaustion was written all over his face. You still look a little out of it, Mirajane noted, her voice carrying a gentle warmth. It's about time to get moving today. Elfman, can you take Rhodes to freshen up? Elfman cracked his knuckles. If you're a man, you need to toughen up. Rhodes instinctively leaned back. Wait, does he want to arm wrestle? My injuries aren't even fully healed yet. Elfman. I know, sis, Elfman grumbled, relenting immediately. The day's schedule was much the same as yesterday, eating, drinking, studying, and struggling to communicate. But today, Rhodes could walk. His left leg was still stiff, but at least he could make his way to the tavern on his own. He took a seat at the counter, quietly watching the guild's morning routine unfold. As the sun slowly rose, the guild came to life. Some members ordered breakfast and chatted with friends, while others gathered near the notice board, scanning the requests posted on it. Every now and then, someone would tear off a paper, register the mission with Mirajane, and rush off. Some people simply stood around, observing the chaos. Rhodes, whom Rhodes had met the day before, arrived early, setting up his easel and carefully mixing colors before beginning a new painting. Meanwhile, Mirajane worked effortlessly, carrying plates, wiping down tables, and registering missions, all while maintaining her usual sunny smile. She paused to chat with guild members here and there, adding to the lively atmosphere. Whenever she had a spare moment, she would come over to teach Rhodes a few more words. Rhodes watched the people coming and going with curiosity, listening to conversations in the hopes of catching something familiar. But most of the time, it felt like watching a foreign movie without subtitles. He was starting to pick up on patterns in the language, but fully understanding was still a challenge. Even though many of the guild members had distinct appearances, he couldn't recognize any of them. At least, not until the door suddenly slammed open. A young man with spiky, cherry-colored hair burst into the hall with a loud yell. Old man! Where's the dragon? Where's the person who got attacked by the dragon? Natsu, stop making so much noise this early in the morning. Quit talking nonsense, Macau. Natsu shot back at the middle-aged man with short purple hair. Just tell me already, where's the old man? And where's the guy who got attacked by a dragon? A small blue cat followed closely behind Natsu, leaping onto the table with ease. Turning toward another middle-aged man with a crew cut and a pipe in his mouth, the cat explained in a cheerful tone. Natsu overheard that the master rescued someone who was attacked by a dragon, so he rushed over right away. Dragon? Are you sure about that? Wakaba exhaled a ring of smoke, frowning slightly. All I heard was that some massive beast rampaged through the eastern forest and tore down a whole stretch of trees. That's it. Natsu slammed both hands on the table and leaned forward, his voice filled with excitement. So what happened? Did a dragon show up? Did the old man fight with it? How would I know? Wakaba shrugged. The master left yesterday for the guild meeting. Doesn't seem like he was in a fight. But he did bring someone back, Macau added, nodding toward the front counter. He casually pointed his thumb at Rhodes. That'd be him. He was pretty banged up yesterday. Hey, wait. Before Macau could finish his sentence, Natsu had already dashed across the room. Rhodes stared at Natsu. Sakura-colored hair, a checkered scarf, and a black coat, there was no mistaking it. So, this was the Natsu Dragneel. Once again, the reality of his situation settled in. On one hand, he felt somewhat relieved. He recalled a conversation with his roommate, Tatsuya, who once mentioned that fairy tale had a happy ending. There was even a joke that the fairy tale battle theme made its characters nearly unbeatable. As long as he stayed here, he probably didn't have to worry too much about his safety. But on the other hand, this confirmed it. There was no denying it anymore. He was in an entirely different world. Even though he knew the names of a few people, he was still surrounded by complete strangers. By now, Natsu had reached the counter and was standing right in front of Rhodes. His expression was eager, and he was speaking no shouting something at him. But Rhodes didn't understand a single word. Seeing his confusion, he instinctively turned to Mirajane for help. Mirajane, who had been standing beside him, quickly stepped in. Natsu, calm down. Rhodes is still struggling to understand our language. Natsu froze. Hey? You mean, he can't speak? Mirajane nodded. It's possible that the language and writing from his homeland are completely different from ours. He's already working hard to learn. You've gotta be kidding me, Natsu groaned, clenching his fists in frustration. We finally got a lead on a dragon, and now this happens. Natsu, your face is way too intense, Mirajane scolded playfully, motioning for him to relax. You'll scare him at this rate. Taking a deep breath, she continued, try asking Rhodes for help. If that doesn't work, we'll just have to wait for the master to return. Or maybe Levy can help when she gets back. Chapter 4, Lost in Translation. Until now, Natsu didn't have the patience to wait for Makarov or Levy to return. The moment he heard that Rhodes might be able to help, he immediately dragged him over. With Rhodes' illustrations, Mirajane's patient gestures, and her soft-spoken explanations, Rhodes finally managed to understand what they were asking. But he really hadn't seen a dragon. All he had encountered was a massive spotted bear with the features of a pig, and that thing had nearly killed him. Wait, were dragons even real in this world? Considering that magic existed, the idea of dragons didn't seem far-fetched. Natsu still looked frustrated. Myra, when's the old man coming back? Tomorrow or the day after, Mirajane answered. Routine meetings don't usually take too long. Natsu made a quick decision. Happy, we're not taking any jobs until the old man gets back. The blue cat raised a paw in response. Sir. Without hesitation, Natsu strode over to a table and plopped himself down. Myra, I want the flame-set meal. Got it, it'll be right up. Mirajane relayed the order to the kitchen. She turned back to Rhodes, sensing his confusion. Natsu doesn't mean any harm. He just gets impatient sometimes. Rhodes nodded. Even though he didn't fully understand the situation, it made sense that the protagonist of a shonen manga would be impulsive and hot-headed. At that moment, the blue cat suddenly stood up on the table and raised his paw. Myra, I'll have a grilled fish. Rhodes' eyes widened in shock. The cat talks. Mirajane giggled. Happy isn't an ordinary cat. Rhodes slowly nodded. A talking cat wasn't too surprising in a world with magic. But his understanding of this world was challenged once again when Laki brought out Natsu's meal. On the tray were 2 plates and a cup. At first glance, the food seemed normal in shape. But there was one very big problem: they were all on fire. Rhodes stared at the burning dishes in disbelief. Mirajane gently explained, that's flame pasta, flame fried chicken, and a flame drink. They're prepared with a special cooking method. Rhodes barely had time to process her words before Natsu casually grabbed a handful of fire with his bare hands and stuffed it into his mouth. Rhodes nodded slowly. I guess it's normal for food in a magic world to be a little different. Mirajane noticed his reaction and smiled knowingly. Rhodes had no idea that, in reality, only Natsu was capable of eating something like this. As time passed, Rhodes met more guild members, each more unique than the last. He witnessed different kinds of magic, some practical, some bizarre, and some outright ridiculous. At one point, he even saw a full-blown fight break out. It had started because of Elfman and Natsu, and before long, a quarter of the tavern was caught up in the chaos. To Rhodes' surprise, Mirajane didn't seem concerned in the slightest. She simply stood by with a warm smile, calmly asking Rhodes to step back while the brawl escalated. Rhodes couldn't help but question his initial impression of her. Maybe Miss Mirajane isn't as gentle as I thought. She just acts that way because I'm a stranger? He had expected the protagonist's guild to be lively. But this was way too lively. Time passed in a strange mix of calm and unease. For Rhodes, there was little to do besides continue learning the language and observing the daily life of the guild. That is, until the afternoon of the 3rd day after his arrival. Things finally changed. Makarov had returned. And he wasn't alone. With him was a blonde, handsome man who immediately drew attention. A group of excited girls quickly gathered around, their voices rising in excitement. It's Hibiki from Blue Pegasus. The Hibiki, who ranked first on the mages I want as my boyfriend list. He's so dreamy. Hibiki responded to their admiration with a charming smile, pressing his index and middle fingers together in greeting. His effortless charisma sent the crowd into another round of squeals. Across the room, a bespectacled man in a green jacket visibly panicked at the attention Hibiki was drawing. Hoping to avoid comparison, he quietly slipped out of the guild while everyone was distracted. Mirajane, balancing a tray in one hand, welcomed them with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Master. You must be exhausted from the trip." As Makarov stepped further inside, various guild members greeted him one after another. Natsu, however, wasted no time. He rushed forward with urgency. "Old man! You're finally back. I need to ask you something." Makarov held up a hand to stop him. "I already have an idea of what you're going to ask, but now's not the time to explain. Give me a moment." Natsu scowled but didn't push further. Though clearly frustrated, he chose to hold back at least for now. Makarov turned to Mirajane. "How's the kid doing?" Mirajane glanced at Rhodes. "His name is Rhodes. His injuries have healed well, but communication is still a challenge. I've been teaching him the common language, but it's going to take time." Makarov nodded approvingly. "You've done well. But I have a faster solution." He turned to Hibiki, who was still surrounded by his admirers, then glanced back at Mirajane. "Let's take him to the infirmary first." Mirajane nodded. "All right." Rhodes followed Mirajane back to the infirmary, confused. Were they going to check his injuries again? His wounds had already healed remarkably fast over the past 2 days. By now, only a bandage remained on his forehead. Whatever medicine they had used on him clearly wasn't ordinary. As he pondered this, Makarov and Hibiki stepped inside, ready to begin whatever they had planned. As soon as Hibiki entered the infirmary, he didn't hesitate for even a second. With practiced elegance, he stepped forward, placed one hand over his chest, and gave a gentlemanly bow to Mirajane. "You must be the famous Miss Mirajane. I must say, you are even more dazzling in person than in the magazines. It's truly an honor to meet you. I am Hibiki of Blue Pegasus. Please, allow me the pleasure of buying you a drink." Mirajane rested her cheek against her palm and smiled. "This really isn't the time or place for that, is it?" "Ah, you're absolutely right. My apologies for my rudeness." Hibiki suddenly dropped to one knee in an exaggerated display of chivalry and extended his hand. "Then, are you free tonight?" Rhodes, who barely understood what was being said, could still tell that this guy was a unique character. Even by fairy tale standards, Hibiki stood out. Wait, now that he thought about it, wasn't there someone in the guild who looked quite similar to him? But now wasn't the time to dwell on that. Pushing the thought aside, Rhodes turned toward Makarov, stood up, and gave a polite bow. In somewhat stiff but clear common language, he said, "Thank you, for saving me." Makarov chuckled. "Well, I hope this has been a good learning experience for you. But it wasn't me who saved you." Rhodes blinked in confusion. Before he could ask, Makarov's right hand suddenly stretched outward and grew in size, grabbing Hibiki's entire upper body in his palm and yanking him closer. Rhodes' jaw nearly dropped. "Old man Luffy. Wait, old Chji." Makarov's grip tightened slightly as he scolded, "I called you here for a reason, Hibiki. Not to flirt with the girls in my guild." Hibiki, once released, brushed off his jacket and ran a hand through his hair, as if restoring his handsomeness to its peak form. "I understand the assignment." He nodded, exuding confidence. "You need me to help him grasp the basics of the common language as quickly as possible, correct?" "Exactly," Makarov affirmed. "And without damaging his body in any way." "Naturally," Hibiki assured him. "With my magic, I can do it with ease." However, he adjusted his glasses. Receiving such a large amount of information all at once may cause some temporary headaches. "Will that be all right?" Mirajane, standing beside Rhodes, carefully conveyed Hibiki's explanation through gestures and simple words, waiting for his response. Using magic to instantly learn a language, and the only price is a headache? Rhodes didn't hesitate. He nodded decisively. Suffering through a few minutes of pain to master a language was far better than struggling for months trying to learn it the hard way. Short pain was always better than long pain. Makarov nodded approvingly. "All right, let's begin." Hibiki raised his hands, summoning a golden magic circle beneath them. At the center of the glowing formation, a keyboard appeared. As Hibiki's fingers danced over the keys, multiple holographic screens made of shimmering light materialized in the air. Lines of text and symbols scrolled rapidly across them, processing vast amounts of information. One by one, the floating displays vanished, leaving only a single screen. Rhodes was stunned. This is magic? It looked more like something out of a sci-fi movie than traditional fantasy magic. Mirajane's eyes widened in realization. Oh, I see. This is archive magic. No wonder the master asked you to come. Hibiki flashed a confident smile. That's right. Now, just to confirm, you're only requesting basic common language skills, correct? Then, with a teasing smirk, he added, I do have an extensive library of knowledge. For example, I could also transfer 100 flawless pickup lines and 80 ways to make a woman happy. Interested? Makarov immediately waved him off. Absolutely not. Keep that nonsense out of this. What a shame. Hibiki sighed dramatically before turning back to Rhodes. He reached out and placed a glowing finger against Rhodes' forehead. Golden light instantly enveloped him. Rhodes had no idea how much valuable knowledge he had just narrowly avoided. The only thing he felt was an intense pressure in his mind. It was as if someone had cracked open his skull and force-fed him information. Pronunciation, writing, sentence structure, grammar, all of it flooded his brain at once. And then... The pain was worse than Rhodes had imagined. It felt like his head was caught between slamming doors, being squeezed from both sides. He clutched his temples and let out an involuntary scream. Makarov and Mirajane winced in sympathy, watching him endure the process. Luckily, it didn't last long. The golden glow faded, and the floating screens and keyboard vanished into thin air. It's done, Hibiki announced smoothly, as if he hadn't just put someone through excruciating mental torment. Rhodes collapsed onto the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling with lifeless eyes. His hands remained on his head as he took deep, shaky breaths. Finally, it's over. Mirajane chuckled. That was a very well-formed sentence. Hey! Rhodes blinked in surprise. Wait. I can understand you. Chapter 5, Is Tatsuya a wizard? All done, Hibiki said, turning to Makarov. Master Makarov, I'll be heading back now. Ah, thanks for your hard work, Makarov replied. I'll complete the commission form later and send it to Blue Pegasus along with the payment. Rhodes quickly bowed his head. Thank you for saving my life, and thank you, Mr. Hibiki, for your help. I am truly moved. Mirajane giggled behind her hand. What's with that dramatic reaction? Is Rhodes going to start acting like Loki now? How interesting. Makarov glanced at Hibiki, his expression questioning what was going on. Ah, well. Hibiki rubbed the back of his neck. Since the knowledge was forcefully implanted, it takes a bit of time for the brain to fully process everything. He sighed. So, for a while, he might occasionally say things in a weird or awkward way. You can either help correct him little by little, or, if you'd like, I can return once my magic has improved to refine the process. No, absolutely not. I respectfully decline. Rhodes shook his head quickly. He definitely didn't want to go through that splitting headache again. Knowledge learned through experience was always more solid anyway. And it's definitely not because I'm afraid of pain. Makarov chuckled and nodded. All right, then. The commission is complete. Mirajane walked Hibiki to the door, and just as Rhodes was about to leave as well, Makarov called out to him. Rhodes, right? Has Myra explained the situation to you? Rhodes turned back and nodded. Well. I only understood parts of it because of the language barrier. He paused before adding, you saved me from the forest, right? Makarov shook his head. No, to be precise, I brought you back from the forest. Rhodes blinked, confused. Wait, the beast that attacked me wasn't it you who defeated it? Makarov didn't correct Rhodes' wording for the moment. Instead, he sat cross-legged in the chair beside the bed. Despite sitting, he somehow still seemed taller than when he was standing. Rhodes, feeling it was impolite to look down at the old man, obediently sat on the edge of the bed. Makarov exhaled before speaking. The reason I was there in the first place was because of reports of a monster rampaging through the area. Sightings included strange birds, giant frogs, evil wolves, and even dragons. Rhodes stiffened. Makarov continued. The mayor was worried that if a large group of monsters had appeared in the eastern forest, it could threaten the safety of all of Magnolia. He asked me to investigate. In reality, the main reason Makarov went himself was because poor Lyusika lived in that forest, and he was concerned for her safety. But by the time I arrived, all I found was the corpse of a porcupine, a forest that had been heavily damaged. His eyes met Rhodes. And you, unconscious on the ground. Rhodes' heart pounded as he absorbed the information. The more he listened, the more he realized just how lucky he was to have survived. Should he thank the porcupine that had launched him away? Makarov folded his arms and asked, "What do you remember about the herd?" Rhodes shook his head. "I don't really remember much, but right before I blacked out, I did hear a lot of strange noises." The forest had been eerily silent before that. Makarov nodded thoughtfully. If Rhodes' memory was accurate, then the monster stampede must have occurred right before or after he lost consciousness. Or, perhaps, Rhodes himself had done something to trigger it. Makarov narrowed his eyes slightly. "Then, why did you enter the forest in the first place?" "I don't know." Rhodes hesitated, struggling to put his experience into words. "You might not believe me, but, 1 second, I was walking normally, then I tripped. And when I got back up, I was suddenly there, in the middle of the forest." Makarov hummed in thought, stroking his beard. A sudden displacement. He had heard of such cases before. For example, poor Lyusika, the very healer who had treated Rhodes, had mysteriously appeared in this world decades ago. According to her, she came from a parallel world called Edelas. Then there was Natsu. 6 years ago, Natsu had suddenly appeared near the guild. At the time, he could speak but couldn't read. Rhodes' situation was strikingly similar, except in his case, even the language was different. And more than that. When Natsu first arrived, he had been searching for dragons. And when Rhodes appeared, the legend of a dragon had surfaced as well. Could there be a connection between the two? Makarov suspected that both Rhodes and Natsu had been displaced by powerful space magic, perhaps by a mage from another continent. "I see. I think I have a rough understanding of the situation now." Rhodes blinked in surprise. "You believe me that easily?" Makarov chuckled. "Why wouldn't I?" He met Rhodes' gaze with a wise but kind expression. "I'm pretty confident in my ability to tell when young people are lying." Rhodes opened his mouth but hesitated. Then, after a moment, he realized. "Oh, right. This is a world with magic. In a place like this, his sudden appearance really wasn't that strange after all." Makarov leaned forward slightly. "So, what do you plan to do next?" "I don't have anywhere to go for now," Rhodes admitted. For the past 2 days, he had been thinking about his options. And honestly, staying here seemed like the safest bet. If he left now, he'd risk running into more weird pig-bear hybrids or mystery monsters, and if his luck was bad, he might actually die next time. Fairy Tale was a guild full of mages, and someone like Rhodes, just an ordinary person, probably didn't belong here. But if he wanted to survive, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and ask, "Can I stay?" "Of course." Rhodes blinked. That was too casual. He stared at Makarov, half expecting the old man to take back his words. "You don't even know where I come from," Rhodes pointed out. Makarov simply shrugged. "Are you willing to tell me?" "I..." Rhodes hesitated. How could he explain? Where would he even start? Makarov, however, just smiled kindly. "Then tell me when you're ready." He rested his hands behind his back, looking out at the guild hall with warmth in his eyes. "There are many children in this guild who were once homeless. Some of them couldn't even explain where they came from. Back then, they felt the same uncertainty you do now. But that's exactly why we need companions." Makarov turned back to him, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And that's why guilds exist. Everyone here supports each other, grows stronger together, and sees one another as family. That is what a guild is. That is what Fairy Tale is." For the first time, Rhodes truly understood what Fairy Tale stood for. It wasn't just a mercenary guild like the ones he had seen in games and anime. It was something more. A place of warmth. A place of belonging. The process of joining the guild was surprisingly simple. Makarov led Rhodes to the front desk, where Mirajane was waiting. With a smile, she recorded his name onto the list of official guild members. As if it were the most natural thing in the world. "This is Magnolia City," Makarov explained as they walked. "Located in the eastern part of the Kingdom of Fiori. It has a population of about 60,000 and has been a city where magic has flourished since ancient times. Fairy Tail is the only recognized guild in this city. And then, there's this. Since Rhodes lacked even the most basic knowledge about this world, Mirajane patiently started explaining, beginning with its geography. When the topic turned to Fairy Tail, she pulled out a stamp-like device and smiled. Now, choose a color and where you want your guild emblem. Rhodes rolled up his sleeve and pointed to his left arm. I'll go with blue, he decided. Mirajane pressed the seal onto his arm, and the emblem appeared instantly just like an ink stamp. Rhodes ran his fingers over the spot. It felt exactly the same as before. No roughness, no change in texture. Another magic trick, hey? This won't fade, right? He asked. Of course not, Mirajane assured him as she tucked the seal away. This emblem represents you as a member of Fairy Tail. No matter where you go, it proves your identity as part of the guild. A wizard of Fairy Tail, hey? Rhodes instinctively covered the mark on his arm. But I don't even know magic. What if I get kicked out? He asked nervously. Mirajane giggled. How could that happen? If you want to learn magic, you can start anytime. You just need to find the right path. She tapped a finger against her chin, thinking. That said, finding beginner-friendly jobs might be a bit tricky at first. You don't know magic. Makarov, who had been listening, suddenly pointed at Rhodes' chest. Then what's that magic item hanging around your neck? Rhodes blinked in confusion. Hey! He looked down and picked up his necklace pendant. It was a capital L, set against a blue background with gold trim. If he examined closely, faint, intricate patterns shimmered within it. You're telling me this is a magic artifact? Of course it is, Makarov said confidently. Rhodes frowned. No way. That doesn't make sense. This thing was just a League of Legends pendant. A birthday gift from his roommate Tatsuya. Sure, it was well crafted, and probably not cheap, but it was just a simple decorative piece, right? Could it be that Tatsuya, the guy with thick eyebrows and an honest face, was actually a wizard? Chapter 6, Temporary Home. There's no doubt about it. This is a high-quality magic item. Makarov spoke with certainty. Magic power never lied. He could recognize a magic artifact at a glance. Perhaps Rhodes had managed to survive that monster rampage because of this pendant, even if he himself had no idea how to use it. Rhodes carefully removed the necklace, letting the thin metal chain coil into a small pile in his palm. The pendant rested at the center golden lettering against a deep blue background, shimmering in the light like a miniature star. He turned it over, examining every angle, but aside from looking incredibly well crafted, he couldn't tell what made it so special. Tatsuya, you never gave me an instruction manual for this thing. Rhodes blurted in his native language. Makarov and Mirajane exchanged confused glances. Realizing they didn't understand him, Rhodes sighed and handed the pendant to Makarov. Master, do you know how I'm supposed to use this? You don't necessarily need to know magic to use a magic item, Makarov explained. But once you can use it, you've already taken your first step into magic itself. Taking the necklace into his hand, Makarov murmured something, his words flowing rapidly, almost like a tongue twister. Rhodes tried to make sense of what he was saying, but before he could, he noticed something. The pendant, so ordinary looking in his hands, began to glow faintly in Makarov's. Ah, I see, Makarov mused. It's similar to Celestial Spirit Keys, a magic item that only you can activate. Celestial Spirit Key. Rhodes had no idea what that was supposed to mean. Seeing his confusion, Mirajane smiled and picked up a light pen, sketching a diagram in the air. Celestial Spirit Magic is a type of summoning magic, she explained. It allows a mage to form contracts with celestial spirits and summon them from the celestial realm to assist in battle. But to do so, a mage must possess special keys. It's a form of holder magic. Rhodes examined the glowing drawing Mirajane had made. Her art skills, unfortunately, left a lot to be desired. Compared to Rita's illustrations, her sketches were abstract at best. Because of that, he still had no clue what celestial spirits actually looked like. But he got the general idea. So, he used a word that made sense to him. A summoner, then. Makarov chuckled. That's about right. He handed the necklace back to Rhodes. I'll teach you the fundamentals of magic, along with some of the celestial spirit magic techniques I know. He nodded toward the back of the guild. The guild library also has materials on celestial magic that you can study. So. Makarov's gaze met Rhodes, filled with both encouragement and curiosity. Do you want to learn this magic? Rhodes gripped the pendant tightly. Yes, he said firmly. Rhodes stared at the pendant in his hand, the League of Legends inspired design reflecting the light. So, what exactly could this thing summon? He could already picture the possibilities. With over 100 heroes in that game, if he could summon even just a few of the stronger ones, wouldn't that make him unstoppable? Just the thought made his heart race. But before he could entertain the idea further, Makarov clapped his hands. All right then. We'll start your magic training soon. But first, let's deal with some practical matters. Rhodes blinked. Practical matters. And just like that, Rhodes was kicked out of the infirmary. Since his injuries had mostly healed, there was no reason for him to keep taking up a bed. Now, that left him with a big problem finding a place to live. Getting a house in a completely foreign city, no, a foreign world felt more than a little nerve-wracking. Thankfully, Makarov had already arranged something for him. A house not far from the guild, less than a kilometer away in a straight line. Rhodes had already gotten a glimpse of it. It looked like a street-facing shop with the first floor designed for business and the second floor serving as a living space. The owner was a young man in his 20s named Goodman Riel. Apparently, he had lived there a few years ago but moved out after getting married. Now, he only came by during the day to run the store. The place was already fully furnished. It had a kitchen, a bathroom with a shower, and even a bathtub. The bedroom wasn't very big, but for one person, it was more than enough. The rent? 80,000 jewels per month. Rhodes had no real understanding of how currency worked here, but according to Mirajane, that was considered incredibly cheap for a place in Magnolia. The landlord's reasoning for the low rent was simple: he wasn't using the second floor anyway, and having a wizard live there made him feel safer. Rhodes suspected that the real reason had more to do with the fact that the guy occasionally visited Fairy Tales Tavern for drinks. Maybe this was just his way of staying on good terms with the guild. Still, even though the rent was cheap, Rhodes had a much bigger problem: he couldn't afford it. The money he used to pay the rent came from none other than Master Makarov. A loan of 150,000 jewels. With 80,000 J going straight to rent, that left 70,000 J for food and daily necessities. At first, the amount sounded huge. But when Rhodes got a look at the currency itself, he realized. The bills were in thousands and tens of thousands. Yet, no way this had the same value as real-world currency. But the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. Wait. I've been living off the guild's food and medicine for days, haven't I? And not the cheap stuff, either. Those medicines healed me way too fast to be anything but expensive. Then there was Hibiki's payment. Magic-assisted language learning definitely didn't come free, right? But at the time, he had been too out of it to ask how much it cost. And now? He was officially in debt. Who the hell goes broke right after getting Ice ID? With very mixed feelings, Rhodes set out to buy the essentials. A quick stop at a nearby store, and he picked up basic toiletries: towels, toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, and shampoo. That alone cost him nearly 2,000 J. Then came the real necessities: bed sheets, pillows, a blanket, another 20,000 J, gone just like that. Rhodes stared at his thinning wallet. Will 50,000 J be enough for food for an entire month? He thought back to Natsu's flame-set meal. That thing cost over 1,000 J. Normal food was probably cheaper, but still. If worst came to worst, he'd just have to cook for himself. With that in mind, he decided to set 20,000 J aside for clothes. Better safe than sorry, though, so he cut the budget in half. Having an extra 10,000 J for emergencies sounded like a very good idea. At least it's summer right now, he muttered, briefly relieved. Then it hit him, he'd probably need a mosquito net. And just like that, his remaining wealth shrank even further. After a long afternoon of shopping, Rhodes finally managed to get everything he needed and lugged it all back to his new place. By the time evening rolled around, he decided to head over to the guild for dinner. Compared to the lively chaos of the daytime, the guild was noticeably quieter now. Most of the remaining members were here to grab dinner, just like him. A few others were slumped over the tables, completely wasted. Some were snoring, others were still drinking, and a few were locked in heated debates, their faces red as they argued over who knows what. From the looks of it, things were one wrong word away from a full-blown fight. Rhodes quickly scanned the guild hall. That fire-breathing interrogator from earlier Natsu was nowhere to be seen. Looks like he had already gotten his answers from Master Makarov. At that moment, Mirajane gracefully set down a tray filled with plates and cups onto a table before turning toward Rhodes with a warm smile. "Rhodes, you're back. Did you finish settling into your new place?" "More or less," Rhodes nodded. "I figured I'd grab dinner here." "That's okay, right?" "Of course. What would you like to eat?" Rhodes glanced at the plates coming out of the kitchen, spotting someone eating a particularly delicious-looking dish. "I'll have whatever that guy just ordered. It looks good." Mirajane's smile widened. "All right. One super devil spicy curry." Then, she turned toward the warrior at the other table, pumping her fist in encouragement. "Make sure you finish what you started." Rhodes froze. "Wait. What did she just say?" Wait a second." He quickly waved his hands to stop her. "Super what now?" Mirajane blinked innocently. "Curry rice. And before that?" "Oh, just super devil spicy." Rhodes slowly raised a hand. "I really don't think the words just and only are supposed to be used that way." Mirajane tilted her head and gestured toward the man who had ordered before him. "It's fine. See? He's enjoying it." Rhodes turned to look. Only to immediately regret it. The guy's entire face was red, sweat dripping down his forehead, eyes watering, and worst of all, he was literally breathing fire. "He's breathing fire." Mirajane giggled. "Ah, I thought you'd like it, Rhodes. Rhodes was already shaking his head. "I beg you absolutely, without a doubt, no exceptions, please change my order to something normal." "What a shame. I was really looking forward to seeing your reaction," Mirajane giggled, her playful tone making it clear she definitely found this entertaining. With that, she gracefully turned and walked off, leaving Rhodes utterly bewildered. Was she teasing him? Yesterday, she had been so gentle and kind, taking care of him like a big sister. But now, she was openly messing with him. Was it because she didn't need to look after him anymore? Rhodes sat there in silence, his emotions thoroughly mixed. Please bring back the gentle, considerate Mirajane. Chapter 7, Money. The moment the plate was set down on the table, a wave of warm, savory fragrance filled Rhodes' nose. The scent of curry, mixed with the gentle sweetness of high-quality rice, made his stomach growl in anticipation. He picked up his spoon and took in the sight before him. On the left side of the plate was a deep brown-red curry, filled with tender cubes of beef, soft chunks of potato, and vibrant pieces of carrot. On the right, a mound of perfectly steamed white rice, looking even more pristine in contrast to the rich sauce. The colors, the textures, the aroma, everything was so tempting that Rhodes found himself hesitating, unsure of where to begin. That hesitation, however, lasted only a few seconds before his hunger took over. Spoon in hand, he cut right through the middle, scooping up a perfect balance of curry and rice. As soon as it hit his tongue, a medley of flavors exploded in his mouth. Savory, rich, and aromatic, with just the right touch of heat to make his taste buds tingle. The spices wrapped around the tenderness of the beef, while the smoothness of the curry sauce blended seamlessly with the soft, fluffy rice. Rhodes wasn't great with spicy food, and even this mild burn made his forehead bead with sweat. But the moment the heat passed, another layer of flavor emerged: the subtle sweetness of the rice, the deep umami of the beef, and the gentle, comforting texture of the potatoes. It was so good. He couldn't stop. Completely absorbed in the meal, Rhodes devoured each bite, utterly lost in the simple joy of eating. "You always seem so focused when you eat." Mirajane's soft voice snapped him out of his trance. "Watching you enjoy your food like this makes me feel hungrier myself." Rhodes wiped a bit of sweat from his forehead and chuckled. "Of course, I love good food. I never really paid much attention to it before, but now, I think I've started really enjoying the process of tasting each bite." After thinking for a moment, he added, "Maybe it's because I nearly starved the past few days. Or maybe, nearly dying makes you appreciate the little things more." Mirajane's playful teasing faded, and in its place was the gentle, caring expression he had first come to know. "In that case," she said warmly, "you'll have to work extra hard. Our menu here is very long." Rhodes let out a light-hearted laugh. "I'll do my best, haha. Wait, working hard to eat? Or working hard for eating? Either way, something about that sounds really weird. The satisfying meal set him back 500 J, but in Rhodes' opinion, it was absolutely worth it. After finishing up, he asked Mirajane to settle his food expenses from the past few days. With that, his wallet shrunk yet again. Mirajane looked a little concerned. Are you sure you'll be able to make it to next month like this? Rhodes waved off her worries. I'll be fine. I just need to start earning soon. It's only natural to pay for the food I've eaten. I can't afford to cover the medical expenses yet, but at the very least, I should take responsibility for my meals. Well, those meals were meant as a gesture of support, so you don't have to rush to pay them back. The guild can't be expected to keep covering my meals forever, even if I did trick the master into lending me some money. Mirajane giggled. It was a temporary loan. Oh, a temporary loan, Rhodes echoed, smirking. He then took a serious look at the menu. If he was careful, he could get by with the cheapest options, which cost just a few hundred jewels. If he wanted to eat a bit more while sticking to basic food, a few thousand should suffice. Of course, if he wanted to really enjoy his meals and order freely, there was no upper limit to what he could spend. Rhodes, who very much wanted to enjoy his food, suddenly felt a heavy sense of pressure. Are there any jobs in the guild that don't require magic? He asked cautiously. Mirajane tapped a finger to her chin, deep in thought. If you're interested, you could work part-time as a waiter in the tavern. Since you'll need to leave time for magic lessons, the pay would be around 120,000 J per month. Would that be all right? Of course. Thank you. Rhodes agreed without hesitation. For a wizard, 120,000 J wasn't much at all. Someone like Natsu could earn that in a day or two by taking on a bandit sweeping mission. Even lower-tier mages could make that amount in less than half a month by handling smaller, in-town tasks. Only the absolute weakest wizards, those who could only take on minor jobs worth a few thousand J at a time, would stress over this kind of money. Unfortunately for Rhodes, he wasn't even at that level yet. Right now, he was a quasi-magic apprentice lower than a beginner-level wizard. Just being offered this job was a favor. Mirajane had even made sure to note that he should still set aside time to learn magic. Another perk of the job? It included 2 meals a day. After covering rent and essential expenses, it would take about half a year to fully repay the money he borrowed from the master. Of course, Hibiki's commission and poor Lyusika's medical fees would take a little longer. But Rhodes figured that after a few months, he'd be able to start taking on actual wizard missions. Once that happened, he'd be able to clear his debts much faster. The road ahead was long and full of challenges. But, for now, since he had decided to take the waiter job, he stayed behind that evening to help clean up. The tables and chairs needed to be wiped down and arranged properly, the floors had to be swept, and once it was confirmed that no one was staying behind, the doors had to be locked and the lights turned off before leaving. As Rhodes worked, he was reminded of doing cleaning duty with his classmates back in middle school. After bidding farewell to everyone, the guild members headed home. When Elfman wasn't out on a job, he usually waited for Mirajane so they could leave together. Rhodes walked with the two of them for a short distance, chatting casually along the way. That was when he learned something shocking. Wait, so Elfman is your younger brother? I always thought he was the older one. Mirajane lightly brushed her cheek with her right hand, smiling playfully. Oh my, I'm not at the age where I'd be flattered by being called young, you know. She said she wasn't happy, but that persistent smile on her face told a different story. Elfman, on the other hand, looked pleased. A real man should be mature, he declared confidently. Rhodes fell into deep thought. Had he just unintentionally complimented both siblings? Am I the kind of person who's naturally good with words? I don't even know myself. By the time Rhodes arrived back at his place, the landlord had already locked up and gone home for the night. He pulled out the key and let himself in. The house was completely dark, but with the faint moonlight filtering through the window, he carefully made his way up the stairs. The entire structure was made of wood, including the staircase. Fortunately, the steps didn't creak under his weight, which meant the place wasn't too old. Once inside, he fumbled around for a match and lit the candle on the table. The level of technology here wasn't great, there weren't even electric lights. Most people still relied on candles or oil lamps. Magic-powered lamps did exist, and their prices had dropped significantly in recent years, but they were still far more expensive than standard oil lamps. So naturally, the landlord hadn't bothered installing any magical conveniences in this old house that had sat vacant for years. There was running water, at least. But if he wanted hot water, he'd have to boil it himself. After a quick wash, Rhodes dried himself off with a towel, shivering slightly from the cold water. Maybe I should just use the guild's bathhouse instead. He sighed and glanced around the dimly lit room. Looks like I'll need to buy some appliances in the future. Or, well, what do they call them here? Household magic tools. Money, money, Rhodes muttered to himself, sighing as he walked. Having been thrown into this world under such bizarre circumstances, he now had to worry about something as mundane as making a living. Thinking about his earnings from working at the tavern and the potential rewards from wizard commissions, he couldn't help but look forward to the future. With infinite hopes for what lay ahead, Rhodes drifted into a deep sleep. When Rhodes opened his eyes, golden sunlight streamed diagonally through the window, warming his face. He bolted upright in panic. I'm late. But instead of the usual morning rush of campus life, a chorus of street vendors greeted him from outside. Fresh apples. Crisp pears. Motherwort, best prices in town. Fresh squash. Come take a look. The lively sounds of Magnolia's morning market filled the air. Rhodes blinked, his heart still racing from instinctive panic. And then, slowly, realization set in. Lying back down, he draped an arm over his eyes with a heavy sigh. Right. I guess I won't be attending any morning classes anymore. Is that a good thing? For a while, he lay in silence. Then, shaking off the remnants of sleep, Rhodes got up and washed up, changing into the white t-shirt and cropped black pants he'd bought the day before. After quickly running a hand through his hair to fix his bangs, he headed downstairs only to stop abruptly, turn back, grab the necklace from his bedside table, and slip it over his head before leaving. Good morning, Mr. Rhodes. Did you sleep well? The familiar, enthusiastic voice of his landlord, Goodman Riel, greeted him the moment he stepped outside. Rhodes returned the greeting with a nod. Good morning, Goodman. You're here early. Just arrived. I was about to open up, Goodman replied as he began setting up his shop. The storefront was simple yet clever in design. A large wooden panel, about 2 meters long and a meter wide, made up the main window. Unlocking a few latches from inside, Goodman pulled it outward, letting it fold down. As soon as he extended the 2 wooden legs attached to its sides, the entire panel transformed into a sturdy display counter. Rhodes watched with interest. No wonder the shop entrance was positioned to the side rather than in the middle. With a small smile, he stepped forward and helped Goodman set up the awning before preparing to leave. Wait a sec. Goodman called out. Consider this a little thank you gift. He tossed a small object toward Rhodes. Catching it in his palm, Rhodes examined it curiously. It was a wooden charm, no more than 2 or 3 centimeters in size, with delicate engravings that he couldn't quite decipher. A beautifully knotted red cord was looped through the top. What's this? A good luck charm, Goodman said with a chuckle. Just an ordinary trinket, really. I carved the wooden plaque myself, and my wife tied the knot. He scratched the back of his head. I heard wizards sometimes take on dangerous commissions, so, well, just thought I'd give you something for good luck. Goodman's shop specialized in handmade crafts, wood carvings, woven accessories, and the like. He must have made this one while preparing stock yesterday. Thank you, Rhodes said sincerely. He thought about mentioning that he wasn't anywhere near ready to take on dangerous jobs yet, but in the end, he simply accepted the charm with care. A warm, quiet feeling settled over him. Perhaps, just perhaps, the loneliness and unease of suddenly being thrown into a new world didn't feel quite as overwhelming anymore. Chapter 8, Open the Door to Another World. Good morning, Miss Mirajane, Miss Lockie. When Rhodes arrived at the guild, Mirajane and Lockie were already busy wiping down the tables. Even though they had cleaned them the night before, they had to give everything another wipe down before opening for business. Good morning, Rhodes, Mirajane greeted him with her usual bright smile. Also, no need for the honorifics. Just call me Myra, like everyone else does. Same here. Just call me Lockie, Lockie chimed in. Myra. Lockie. Rhodes hesitantly repeated, then added somewhat formally, that feels a bit overfamiliar. Myra chuckled and corrected him, that's not the right context for overfamiliar. Lockie, on the other hand, dramatically held her face in her hands, her long purple hair partially covering them, as she struck a self-indulgent pose. Maybe Rhodes just sees us as princesses or queens. She mused, pretending to be flattered. Sorry, no such thing, Rhodes deadpanned, immediately shutting that theory down. After helping out a little, Rhodes sat at the counter to have breakfast, just a simple combination of milk and sandwiches. It was far cheaper than the curry rice he had the night before, but the taste was excellent. For some reason, though, he couldn't shake the feeling that food tasted even better the morning he woke up at the guild. Maybe it was just because he had been starving back then. Leaning lazily against the counter, Rhodes enjoyed his meal while watching guild members trickle in one by one. The variety of clothing styles in this world was unexpectedly diverse. Some wore traditional cheongsams or tang suits, while others sported Japanese kimonos and yukatas. There were also elegant European dresses and formal tailcoats. Modern casual wear like what Rhodes was currently wearing wasn't uncommon either. But beyond that, there were also some truly unique outfits. Like the girl who had just walked in. She had a pair of curved horns on her head, a long tiger print dress with high slits, matching tiger print arm sleeves, and tiger print boots complete with soles shaped like tiger claws. She looked like a fierce little tigress, exuding a wild, untamed energy. That's Mickey Chicken-Tiger, Myra informed him. She's known as the Ghost Princess. Hey! Rhodes blinked in surprise. Myra's eyes gleamed mischievously. You've been staring at her for a while now. Could it be that? Before Rhodes could protest, she leaned in conspiratorially and offered him some unsolicited advice, clearly enjoying herself. Mickey loves a good fight. If you're interested in catching her attention, just challenge her. If you manage to win, I guarantee she'll start seeing you in a whole new light. Rhodes nearly choked on his milk. No, absolutely not. He had a lot to say about that, but he needed a moment to collect his thoughts. I just thought her outfit was unusual. And, isn't everyone here a mage? Why do so many people enjoy physical fights? Myra tilted her head curiously. Shouldn't mages be good at fighting? Magic Rhodes fell silent. Wait, am I the one with the wrong perception here? Thinking back over the past few days at the guild, he had indeed seen plenty of brawls, people throwing punches, knocking each other around. Just yesterday, he had witnessed Makarov slam two rowdy guys straight through the floor with a single punch after they overturned a table. Could it be that the mages in this world were all some kind of battle-hardened magic warriors? The morning shift at the guild's tavern was relatively slow, so after Makarov arrived, Rhodes finally began his first magic lesson. Generally speaking, in order to use magic, you need something called magic power, Makarov began. Magic power is a special kind of energy, something that exists both within our bodies and in the world around us. When the energy inside us resonates in harmony with the energy in nature, magic is born. But to do this, one needs a considerable amount of mental focus and concentration. Since Rhodes had zero knowledge about magic, Makarov had to start with the absolute basics. More advanced concepts, things related to emotions, the soul, and the power of the heart would have to wait until Rhodes made progress in his practice or naturally came to understand them on his own. Do I even have magic in my body? Rhodes asked, his biggest concern gnawing at him. I mean, I'm not even from this world. Makarov, however, reassured him with a knowing smile. Of course you do. You just haven't learned how to sense it yet. For most common folks, unlocking and nurturing their dormant magical energy is a challenging path. Even though some people have latent magical ability, not everyone can access it without training or an awakening event, like trauma, intense desire, or magical exposure. The journey often begins with methods like meditation, a time-honored practice used to attune one's soul to the flow of ether nano/magic particles, the very essence of magic itself. But for you, we'll try a different approach first. Rhodes straightened up, intrigued. What do I need to do? First, focus on your pendant and try to establish a connection with it in your heart. Then, recite the incantation I modified from celestial spirit magic. Makarov carefully taught Rhodes the incantation, guiding him through it word by word. Rhodes, like a parrot, repeated each syllable with utmost concentration. Once you've memorized it, give it a try. Here. Rhodes hesitated, glancing around the tavern uneasily. Will it cause any problems? Makarov chuckled. Don't worry. With your current magic level, you won't be summoning anything too powerful. Even if you could, you wouldn't be able to maintain it. Why does that sound so insulting? Still, since the guildmaster assured him it was safe, Rhodes decided to go ahead with it. Clutching the pendant tightly, he focused his gaze on its gold and blue emblem. After a few seconds, he swore he could feel something, a faint, distant connection. Heart pounding, Rhodes began chanting the spell. I am the bridge between two worlds. You, a being from beyond, heed my call and step through the gateway. The pendant pulsed with a golden and blue glow. Magic surged in the air, crackling with energy. Feeling the surge build, Rhodes tightened his grip and called out the final command. Open the gate to the other world. Bzzzzzzzzz. A deep, resonating hum filled the tavern as a swirling blue vortex burst into existence before Rhodes. Stars flickered within its depths, their distant glow shimmering like constellations. Beyond the vortex, a chilling breeze howled through what seemed to be a vast, frozen abyss. The whistling whines carried a sense of mystery and danger. Something leaped forth from the portal. The magic light show, combined with the heavy atmosphere, had already drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the tavern. This must be a powerful, legendary creature. Everyone thought so. Rhodes thought so too. But when the vortex vanished, leaving only a small, round, fluffy white thing on the floor, silence filled the tavern. Woo woo woo. The tiny creature let out a confused squeak, its round little body trembling slightly as it took in its surroundings. But before long, the tiny creature locked eyes with Rhodes. Then, without hesitation, it stuck out a big pink tongue, waddled forward on its stubby little legs, and latched onto his calf. Rhodes blinked in confusion, staring at the small, fluffy creature clinging to him. Why does this thing look familiar? Curious, he bent down and gently picked it up, turning it over in his hands for a better look. It had round black eyes, a chubby little body, and soft, fluffy white fur almost like a miniature sheep. On top of its head were two curved horns, and its long tongue lolled out of its mouth like an overexcited puppy. Rhodes placed the tiny furball on the counter and hesitantly patted its head. To his surprise, the little creature flopped over onto its back, exposing a pink, heart-shaped belly as if asking for belly rubs. Poro. Rhodes' brain finally caught up, and his eyes widened. This soft, round little creature, he recognized it. Back in Howling Abyss, it was a Poro. Woo woo woo. The tiny Poro let out a joyful squeak, wiggling its little paws in the air, clearly delighted beyond belief. Rhodes stared at it, his expression frozen. Did I just summon a Poro with magic? Chapter 9, Poro. Poro? Is that its name? Such a cute name. Myra's eyes sparkled as she looked at the furry little creature with delight. Rhodes also thought Poro was cute, but what's the point of just being cute? What he wanted was a powerful, formidable, unstoppable summon. With a sigh, Rhodes lifted Poro up and stared directly into its round black eyes, searching for even a hint of combat potential. Can this thing even fight? In response, Poro happily stuck out its oversized pink tongue and lunged forward, going straight for Rhodes' face. With quick reflexes, Rhodes dodged, narrowly avoiding the sloppy face-washing service. Makarov stroked his beard. Do you recognize this creature? Does it have any special abilities? It's called a Poro, and it comes from a very cold place, Rhodes explained, recalling what he knew. As for abilities, he thought for a moment. It eats. A lot. If it eats enough, it grows bigger. If it eats too much, it explodes. Other than that, it can, look adorable. Myra clapped her hands. Wow! That sounds like an amazing summoned creature. Rhodes drooped like a deflated balloon. Ah, thanks for the encouragement. Makarov chuckled. I see, so it's more of an ornamental creature? Don't be discouraged. Even among celestial spirits, some are purely for companionship, like Nakora, the Canis Minor. Besides, having a cute summon like this isn't a bad thing, is it? As if sensing Rhodes' disappointment, Poro's tiny curved horns drooped, and its big tongue retracted, making it look like a pitiful, abandoned puppy. Rhodes let out a sigh and scratched Poro's fluffy chin. Well, I guess I'll just treat it as a pet. Woo! Poro let out a contented trill, rubbing against Rhodes' palm with its fuzzy little body. Its horns perked back up, and its big round eyes sparkled once again. Rhodes, still feeling a little defeated, absent-mindedly pinched Poro's horns, fluffed its fur, and rubbed its soft, heart-shaped belly. Okay, maybe it wasn't so bad. Poro, completely relaxed, flopped onto the counter, tongue lolling to the side in bliss. It looks like a little lamb, but its personality is more like a puppy, Myra giggled. She picked up a small slice of apple from a nearby plate. Do you want a snack? Poro's ears twitched instantly. Before Rhodes could react, the little creature flipped itself over and launched toward Myra's outstretched hand like a fluffy bullet. Its flexibility was astonishing. Rhodes watched in disbelief. Does this thing even recognize people, or does it only recognize food? Makarov cleared his throat, drawing Rhodes' attention back to him. Regardless of Poro's strength, I want you to focus on something else. He looked at Rhodes with a knowing gaze. When you opened the summoning gate just now, did you feel something draining from your body? Rhodes blinked, processing the question. Now that you mention it, yeah, I think I did. Makarov nodded. That was your magic power being used. In general, when a celestial spirit mage opens a gate, they also need to use magic power to maintain their summon's existence. I imagine it's the same for you. Makarov nodded in approval. Now, meditate using the method I taught you. Focus on the magic slowly flowing out of your body. Find its source, observe it carefully, and see the true nature of your own power. Got it. Rhodes sat down on the spot, closing his eyes as instructed. He took a deep breath, allowing himself to concentrate on the faint sensation of magic trickling away from his body. Slowly, the bustling noise of the guild faded into the background. The cheerful sounds of Myra laughing and Poro's playful chirps grew distant. The world around him became silent. And then, Rhodes suddenly saw himself sitting cross-legged in a vast, endless darkness. Around him, faint wisps of blue light flickered like mist, swirling gently in the air. A little further out, he noticed a thin, glowing thread of the same blue light extending from his body. It drifted to the side, leading toward a familiar presence, Poro. So, this is the connection between a summoner and their creature. Intrigued, Rhodes shifted his focus inward, observing the flow of magic within himself. Among the countless floating particles of blue light, something caught his eye. A tiny swirling vortex sat at the center of his chest, slowly rotating like a miniature galaxy. He could feel it absorbing magic from outside his body, while at the same time, magic was seeping out from it. It was a continuous cycle, magic was being used and replenished at the same time. Rhodes easily sensed this balance. He could even tell how much magic was being drained to sustain Poro's presence and how quickly his body was recovering it. If he had to put it into game-like terms. MP-1. MP plus 99. In other words, his magic recovery rate far outpaced his consumption. The extra magic would likely go toward replenishing what he had lost when he first opened the summoning gate. After realizing that Poro's magic consumption was practically negligible, Rhodes completely gave up any hope of it being useful in battle. At best, it was a pet. With that disappointment pushed aside, Rhodes turned his focus inward once again, carefully observing the flow of magic within his body. He began experimenting, directing the tiny glowing specks of magic, trying to control their movement. It felt a little awkward at first, like learning to move a new limb, but it worked. Slowly, he guided the glowing strands of energy, shifting them at will. Back in the real world. As Rhodes manipulated his magic, a subtle phenomenon occurred. His hair swayed gently, as if an invisible breeze was passing through it, shifting from left to right. The guild tavern was noticeably quieter than usual. Not because it was an especially peaceful day, but because Makarov was watching. Every time someone so much as looked like they were about to start a fight, the guild master would slam his palm onto their head, immediately shutting them up. Even Natsu and Gray, who normally fought at least 3 times a day, hadn't dared to throw a single punch. When Rhodes finally opened his eyes, he was met with Makarov's approving smile. Not bad. The old man nodded in satisfaction. This kid had talent. That's enough for today's magic training, Makarov said, stretching his arms. Now, you should probably check on Poro. Rhodes blinked. Hey. Makarov continued, celestial spirit wizards normally have to sign a contract with their summoned beings and build a good relationship with them. For you, he chuckled, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Understood. Thanks, Master. Rhodes stood up, instinctively looking toward Myra only to realize that Poro wasn't with her anymore. Myra smiled and gestured across the room. Over there. Rhodes turned to look and immediately lost all confidence in his own social skills. It had barely been an hour, and yet Poro had already made more friends than he had. The little creature bounced between tables, wagging its pink tongue as it brushed against people's legs, its soft, fluffy body rubbing affectionately against anyone who gave it attention. Whenever someone picked it up, Poro would immediately snuggle into their arms, blinking big, round puppy dog eyes at the food on their table. A clear, shameless plea for snacks. Rhodes watched, completely dumbfounded. The most shocking thing about this little guy wasn't just how adorable he was, it was how ruthless he was when it came to food. The moment he got a treat, he would immediately scurry away, completely abandoning the person who fed him and heading straight for his next target. Like a fluffy little con artist, he mastered the art of looking cute and collecting snacks in record time. Within minutes, almost everyone in the guild knew about this strange, round creature. But only a few, thanks to Myra and Loki's introductions, actually remembered the name of its owner. Rhodes sighed and waved his hand. Poro immediately turned and sprinted toward him, only to trip over his own legs, tumbling like a fluffy ball of yarn before rolling straight to Rhodes' feet. Instead of getting up, he simply flopped onto his back and exposed his belly, his pleading eyes saying, "Rub me." Rhodes helplessly rubbed the soft, heart-shaped fur on his belly again before picking him up and placing him on the counter. "Can you understand me?" he asked. "Woo woo woo." Poro tilted his head and made a valiant effort to nod. Rhodes continued, "Do we need to sign some kind of contract?" Poro shook his head so vigorously that he nearly fell off the counter. Rhodes hesitated. "If you go back to where you came from, will I still be able to summon you next time? There were a ton of Poros in the Howling Abyss, right?" At this, Poro nodded. Then he shook his head. Then he tilted his head with a pleading look that screamed, "Please don't send me back." Rhodes hesitated for a moment before making a guess. "You will be the one I summon next time, but you don't want to go back." Poro's tiny horns perked up, his tail wagging furiously. Rhodes turned to Makarov, looking slightly unsure. Makarov chuckled. "As long as your magic can sustain it, and both of you agree, you can keep him here as long as you like. However," he added with a small smile, "if he starts interfering with your ability to summon more creatures, you might have to send him back." Rhodes nodded. "All right. If you want to stay here, then you can." Poro let out an excited squeak and happily spun around in circles. Myra leaned in and smiled. "Why don't you give him a proper name?" Rhodes blinked. "But, his name is Poro." Myra giggled. "But isn't Poro just a general term? Like calling something dog or cat. He needs a name that's special to him." Poro looked up expectantly, tail wagging eagerly. Rhodes scratched his cheek. I'm really bad at naming things." He stared at the fluffy little ball, thinking hard. "How about Snowball?" Poro's horns drooped. Puff. No reaction. Fluffball. Poro let out a small whimper. Dumpling. The little creature looked absolutely betrayed. Rhodes scratched his head, turning desperately to Makarov and Myra. Any suggestions? How about calling him Warm?" Chapter 10, Warmth, Happiness and Love. "Warm." Rhodes repeated, tilting his head. Myra nodded. "Yes, warm. Because holding it feels so warm." She smiled and continued, "You said Poro comes from a very cold place, right? So, I hope that whenever it's by your side, it will always feel warm." Rhodes thought about it for a moment. "That actually sounds pretty nice. What do you think?" The little Poro's horns perked up excitedly, clearly liking the name. "Then it's settled," Rhodes said, nodding. "From now on, you're Warm." Myra clapped her hands happily. "That's how Happy got his name too." She explained that Happy Natsu's ever-present talking blue cat was named after bringing joy into their lives. "Happy can fly too," Myra added. "And he can even carry people while flying. It's just a shame that you haven't seen it yet." Rhodes, who had only ever seen Happy walking like a normal cat, was suddenly skeptical. Just as Rhodes was getting used to the name Warm, Myra turned towards him. "All right, it's almost noon. Time to get to work." Rhodes nodded. "Got it. I'm on it." Setting Warm down on the counter, Rhodes grabbed a tray and got ready for his shift. However, the moment he stepped forward, Warm trotted after him, tail wagging excitedly. Myra giggled. "Looks like you have a little helper." Rhodes sighed, but deep down, he didn't really mind. The first order was 2 beers for one of the guild's regulars. Rhodes walked over to a middle-aged man lounging casually in his seat. The man had a brown crew cut, a floral button-up shirt, cropped trousers, and flip-flops. He also had a pipe in his mouth, which somehow made him look even more carefree. Rhodes set the drinks down. "Here's your beer." The man, Wakaba, lazily picked up the glass but sighed dramatically. "Ah, why didn't Mirajane bring it over herself?" Rhodes nearly rolled his eyes. "Yeah, if I had the choice, I'd prefer a beautiful waitress bringing me drinks too." Rhodes placed the drinks down and introduced himself. "My name is Rhodes. I just joined Fairy Tale and I'm working as a waiter in the tavern for now. Please take care of me." Wakaba's eyes lit up with interest. "Ah hey newcomer." A puff of smoke in the shape of a hand floated out from his pipe as he grabbed another glass of beer and slid it toward Rhodes. "As you can see, I use smoke magic. This one's on me. Welcome to Fairy Tale." Rhodes barely had time to react before. Bang! The table shook as the man sitting across from Wakaba slammed his palm down and stood up. "Oi, Wakaba, you bastard!" he growled, his voice full of irritation. "Stop handing out my beer like it's yours." The new man had short purple hair, a light beard, and wore a white trench coat. Most notably purple flames flickered from his hands as he spoke. The heat from his magic instantly dispersed Wakaba's smoke hand and snatched back the beer glass before it could even reach Rhodes. He straightened his collar with an exaggerated ahem, putting on a self-important expression. "If anyone's going to treat him to a drink it'll be me." Wakaba's eyebrow twitched. "Damn it, Macau." He stood up too, slamming his own glass down before stepping onto his chair and leaning forward aggressively. "You wanna start something, hey?" Macau did the exact same thing, stepping onto his chair and leaning just as far forward. "Who's afraid of you?" The two men pressed their foreheads together, neither backing down, a competitive fire burning in their eyes. Above Wakaba's pipe, thick smoke curled and gathered ominously. Meanwhile, Macau's purple flames flared up, swirling in his palm as both men rolled up their sleeves, preparing to brawl. At that moment, the beer glass they had been fighting over slipped from Macau's flames. Rhodes quickly caught it, but a few drops of beer spilled onto his hand. He hesitated before speaking up. Guys." Neither of them even acknowledged him. They were already too caught up in their rivalry, 1 second from punching each other in the face. Rhodes scanned the room for help, but instead of concerned expressions, all he saw were eager grins. Some guild members had already started chanting excitedly. "Fight! Fight! Fight! Teach him a lesson, Wakaba! Macau, flip him over!" Even Loki, who had been carrying an empty beer glass, had abandoned her duties and joined the crowd, watching with enthusiasm. She casually called out, "Rhodes, if I were you, I'd back away right now." Rhodes blinked. "Why?" Whoosh! A flying beer glass barely missed his ear, whizzing past like a warning shot. Rhodes jerked his head back, only to see that Macau and Wakaba had already jumped onto the table, gripping each other's hands in a fierce arm wrestling match, except they were both standing and shoving against each other with all their strength. Rhodes sighed, rubbing his temples. Forget trying to stop them. Instead, he grabbed his little poro with one hand, the innocent beer glass with the other, and tucked the tray under his arm before swiftly retreating to the counter straight to the safest place in the guild. Right next to Master Makarov. Placing the beer down, Rhodes turned to the guild master, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Master, should we really just let them go at it like this?" Makarov simply picked up the glass of beer Rhodes had brought over and took a calm sip. "Let them be." He waved a hand dismissively. "It's not Fairy Tale if there isn't a little chaos." Now that no one was meditating, there was nothing stopping a good old-fashioned brawl. In fact, someone in the crowd had even started taking bets. The moment the odds were called, Makarov casually tossed 1,000J into the pot. "I bet Wakaba falls first." He grinned. Rhodes stared in silent horror. "I thought the guild was only this chaotic because you were away." He watched as Makarov cheered alongside the others, then dropped his head in despair. "Is there seriously no normal person in this guild?" Mirajane, calmly wiping a wine glass, smiled sweetly. "Don't say that. This is fun." At the center of the mayhem, Macau and Wakaba's match escalated. The long table beneath them creaked dangerously, and in the next few seconds, crash! The table collapsed under their weight, stools were knocked over, and the two rolled apart, gasping for breath. After seeing no further destruction, the onlookers quickly lost interest and dispersed. For fairy tale, this was just a minor scuffle, one of many. Rhodes watched the two men, who were now sitting at separate tables, arms crossed and glaring at each other. Are they okay? He asked hesitantly. Mirajane chuckled, placing the freshly cleaned glass back on the counter. Oh, don't worry. She tilted her head toward them. Give it a few minutes, they'll be drinking together again in no time. Mirajane, completely unfazed by the wreckage around her, turned to Makarov with a sweet smile. Master, that glass of beer earlier, I'm still putting it on your tab. Makarov froze mid-sip. Huh? That beer was clearly Macau's order. Mirajane's smile didn't falter. But you were the one who secretly drank it. Makarov grumbled in defeat. Yet, with his failure to dodge the bill, the once proud and mighty guildmaster visibly deflated. Watching the exchange unfold, Rhodes felt his image of Makarov begin to crack. Wait. This old man isn't as righteous as I thought. He looked around at the utter madness that was fairy tale and came to a painful realization. No wonder the guild is like this. The master is just as bad as the rest of them. Before he could ask what would happen to the shattered table, a familiar figure strode forward. Loki. She raised her hands, forming a strange, theatrical pose. Would make sincere friendship table. At her command, the splintered wood and broken legs of the table suddenly began to shift. Like pieces of a puzzle reassembling themselves, the fragments bent, stretched, and fused back together, restoring the long table to its original shape as if nothing had ever happened. A buck-toothed guild member standing nearby let out a heavy sigh. Why do you always have to give your spells such weird names? Loki pushed her purple hair back, adjusting her glasses with a self-satisfied smirk. Oh? Are you jealous of my magic and unparalleled talent? The guild member vehemently waved his arms. Who the hell would be jealous of that? But Loki was already too deep in her own world, resting her cheek on her hand with a dramatic sigh. Sigh. I really am such a sinful woman. Rhodes. He had suspected it before, but now there was no doubt Loki was definitely a narcissist. Still, her magic was seriously convenient. But her magic was quite handy, almost on par with Yamato from the next studio over. No wonder no one holds back when destroying the guild. Chapter 11, The Big Sister and the Pervert. Molding magic is a type of magic that allows a mage to form something using their magic energy, Myra explained to Rhodes while wiping down the counter. On the other hand, some shaping magic can also be used to erase or take away a specific shape. Rhodes listened intently, finding this magic surprisingly practical. That sounds incredibly useful, he mused, picturing all the possibilities. I could just create a chair whenever I need one, or even build a house on the spot. That would be amazing. Myra nodded with a knowing smile. It definitely has its advantages. There are different types too. Wood make magic, like what Loki uses, as well as ice make, earth make, and many more. The fascinating part is that each type of shaping magic reflects the personality of the caster. Personality. Rhodes raised an eyebrow. How does Loki's magic reflect her personality? He glanced at the self-absorbed Loki, who was admiring her own reflection in a polished beer mug. Ah, is it in the naming of her spells? Myra giggled mischievously but didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Rhodes with an interested look. Speaking of magic, I don't think I've told you what my magic is, have I? Makarov, who had been watching lazily with a drunken smirk, glanced at the two of them but chose not to say a word. You? Rhodes tilted his head. I haven't seen you use magic yet. What kind of magic do you use, Myra? Myra's smile widened. Here, let me show you. She clasped her hands together, and in a puff of white smoke, something unexpected happened. The smoke cleared and Rhodes nearly fell off his stool. Myra's body remained exactly the same, but her head had transformed into Worm, the tiny Poro. Rhodes' brain short-circuited. Worm, the actual Poro, was even more terrified. The little creature skittered backward across the counter, dragging its fluffy butt behind it as if trying to escape. But Myra wasn't done yet. Now, change only the head, Rhodes. Poof. Rhodes stared in horror as his own face suddenly appeared on Myra's body, his head, her dress. Sister. You're my real sister, please have mercy. Rhodes clutched his head, feeling like he was about to have an existential crisis. Myra changed back to her normal form, looking completely unbothered. Oh? I thought it looked pretty good. Rhodes shuddered. The fact that you can do it so well is exactly why I'm worried. Myra giggled, correcting his grammar again. Not worried, troubled. Rhodes sighed. Yes, troubled. Wait, so you knew all along? Myra just smiled even more sweetly, which only made him more nervous. Bang! A stack of bills slammed down on the counter. Myra, get me a barrel of beer. A tall brunette woman in a revealing outfit leaned casually against the counter, a confident smirk on her face. Kana, drinking this early? Myra asked, raising an eyebrow. Hee hee. Kana winked playfully. I was planning to take on a job after lunch, but thanks to Macau, I just made some quick cash. Congratulations, Myra replied smoothly, effortlessly lifting a full beer barrel onto the counter with one hand. Rhodes' jaw dropped. Wait. That barrel is ridiculously heavy. I struggled just to roll it across the floor. And Myra just lifted it like it was nothing. Is she really a mage? The girl Myra had called Kana was certainly something else. Without hesitation, she popped the cork off the barrel and tilted it back, guzzling the alcohol straight from the massive container. Rhodes could hardly believe his eyes. Where the hell do these girls get their strength? Myra had effortlessly lifted a heavy beer barrel like it was nothing, and now Kana was downing a ridiculous amount of alcohol with ease. Does magic enhance strength too? Rhodes couldn't help but steal a few glances at Kana before awkwardly looking away. This woman was way too bold. Her lower half was dressed in casual cropped pants and leather sandals, but the upper half. Rhodes was too flustered to tell if she was wearing a swimsuit, lingerie, or just a particularly daring top. Either way, the open vest, bare waist, and abundant cleavage were a lot to take in. For someone thrown into this world out of nowhere, it was a bit much for him to process. Worm, however, had no such worries. The little furball saw someone sitting down and immediately trotted over, tilting its fluffy head as if to beg for food. Hey? You want a drink too? Kana grinned as she noticed the tiny creature at her feet. She waved at Myra, already reaching for a cup. Myra, grab a small glass. Let's see if this little guy can handle some booze. Myra paused. Rhodes, can Worm even drink alcohol? Rhodes considered for a moment. I have no idea. He shrugged. Might as well give it a shot. Kana suddenly raised an eyebrow and smirked. You're not even gonna turn around when you talk to me. Her voice carried a playful drunken slur. What's the matter? You're new here, and you're already ignoring me. Rhodes froze. And no, it's not that sorry. He forced himself to turn around and face Kana properly. The problem was, he still had no idea where to look. His gaze darted around awkwardly, landing anywhere but on her. I just, that is. Kana's smirk widened. Oh. Her brown eyes gleamed with amusement, and she leaned forward slightly. Wait a minute. Don't tell me. You're the shy type, hey. She grinned wickedly. Let me guess, you've never even had a girlfriend before, have you? Rhodes felt an instant headache coming on. He'd been thrown into a different world, barely learned magic, and was now getting grilled by a drunken beauty in the middle of a rowdy tavern. This wasn't how he thought his fairy tale journey would go. Kana didn't even need to hear an answer. She had already read everything she needed from his panicked expression. She burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. That reaction is priceless. She leaned even closer, her teasing tone turning even more playful. So, what do you say, kid? Want your big sis Kana to take good care of you? And no, that won't be necessary. Rhodes stammered, his face flushing red. Was this woman drunk, or was she always like this? Unbeknownst to him, the so-called big sis Kana was actually only 17 younger than him. But that didn't change the fact that he had absolutely no idea how to handle her. Rhodes, Gray at table 3 wants fried pork chops and pasta. Rhodes shot her a look of pure gratitude, grabbed the tray, and bolted like his life depended on it. Kana pouted, tilting her barrel back to take a long, heavy gulp. Myra, you're such a buzzkill. Myra, ever the smiling devil, tilted her head playfully. Oh? But I thought you really cared about Rhodes, big sis Kana. Her voice dripped with mischief. Should I have let you hug him first? Or maybe kiss him? Or just skip to the good part and... Pfft. Kana nearly choked on her drink, spewing out a mouthful of wine. The confident, smooth-talking big sis from earlier? Now flustered beyond belief. Her face turned red, and she slammed the counter in protest. Enough, enough. She glared at Myra, who just chuckled. Meanwhile, Rhodes had already made his great escape. Dash. Rhodes recognized the name Gray. He had seen posters of him around the guild. But compared to Natsu's loud personality, Gray didn't seem as memorable, at least, until now. As Rhodes approached table 3, tray in hand, he looked up. And froze. Eyes widening. Jaw dropping. Brain short-circuiting. Naked. 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 Why is he naked? Rhodes nearly dropped the tray. Sitting right in front of him, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, was a shirtless man. Rhodes' poor, innocent brain struggled to process the blatant disregard for clothing. Hey? What's wrong? Gray raised an eyebrow. Rhodes' eye twitched. This guy's chest and abs were ridiculously toned, sure, but that wasn't the point. Why was he half naked in broad daylight? Rhodes scanned the floor. A shirt, trousers, and shorts were carelessly strewn about. It wasn't like Gray had lost his clothes. He had clearly taken them off on purpose after entering the guild. Hey! Gray blinked in confusion and looked down at himself, his bare torso in full display. Wait! When did I take them off? He frantically grabbed his clothes and hurriedly put them back on, looking as lost as Rhodes felt. Sitting across from him, a buck-toothed man casually explained. Don't worry about it. Gray's not a pervert, he just strips unconsciously. Rhodes stared at him, his expression blank. I must have learned the common language wrong, he muttered. Since when does randomly taking off your clothes not count as being a pervert? The buck-toothed man glanced at Gray, considering it for a moment. Yeah, no. Now that I think about it, you might as well just assume he is. Who the hell are you calling a pervert, you bastard? Gray slammed his fist on the table and stood up, glowering at the other man. You wanna fight? Rhodes watched the sudden escalation, completely unfazed. It seemed he was finally adjusting to the fairy tale communication style. Step 1, trash talk. Step 2, if you disagree, fight. Wait. A thought struck Rhodes. So if he had felt overwhelmed by Kana earlier, should he have just fought her instead? No, that wouldn't have ended well. For one, it's not great to punch a girl. More importantly, he'd probably lose. Rhodes sighed. Then, his gaze flickered back to Gray. Wait a second. Where did his shirt go again? Chapter 12, Magic Encyclopedia. Rhodes managed to return unscathed after witnessing yet another round of wizard brawling. By then, Kana had already disappeared, still hugging her barrel of booze like it was her life's greatest treasure. Meanwhile, Worm was fast asleep on his back, tiny belly exposed, snoring softly. Makarov was sitting cross-legged nearby, a large snot bubble inflating and deflating from his nose with each breath. Rhodes poked Worm's belly, no response. He waved a hand in front of Makarov's face, still nothing. Why are they both sleeping so soundly? He asked, puzzled. Myra covered her mouth, laughing softly. Both of them got drunk off their feet thanks to Kana. Rhodes glanced across the room at the wine-chugging menace, who was currently hunting down Macau for another drinking match. That woman is brutal. Hee, well, actually. Myra almost spilled the truth about Kana's real reason for drinking, but at the last second, she changed her mind, deciding it would be more fun to let Rhodes find out for himself. She's a really good person, Myra said sweetly. Probably. Rhodes wasn't entirely convinced, but he decided to let it go for now. Then, a completely unrelated mystery popped into his mind. By the way, he asked, is there magic in this world that lets someone instantly remove their clothes? Myra nodded. Yup. That would be requip magic. A lot of female wizards use basic requip spells to instantly change outfits when traveling, super convenient. Rhodes' mind whirred as he connected the dots. So then, if someone mastered requip magic to the highest level, they could even switch out armor and weapons in the middle of battle, right? Myra nodded. Exactly. Rhodes snapped his fingers. Got it. That means the one who's best at requip magic must be Gray. His answer was instant and confident. After all, Gray was one of the main characters in Fairy Tale. He had to have some kind of special ability. And besides, Rhodes had just witnessed Gray's instant shirt removal spell in action. The strongest requip user had to be him, right? His analysis was solid. Logical. Foolproof. Or so he thought. Myra smiled gently. Nope. Rhodes froze. Hey. Gray is an ice make wizard. He creates ice constructs using his magic. That clothes stripping thing. Myra shook her head, suppressing a giggle. That's just a bad habit he picked up during training. That's not magic. Rhodes felt like his world had been shattered. Then who is the strongest Requip wizard? Myra smiled knowingly. That would be Urza. Urza. Urza Scarlet. Myra's tone was filled with genuine admiration. She's the strongest female wizard in the guild. Her Requip magic is on an entirely different level. She can switch between dozens of armors and weapons instantly. Then, Myra added with a playful wink. And she's very beautiful too. Look forward to meeting her. Myra suddenly leaned in conspiratorially, her voice full of amusement. You know, if you're interested in Urza, I have some insider information. Rhodes instantly felt a chill. Myra's smile was way too devious. The last guy in the guild who tried to pursue Urza was Loke. You know, the charming playboy type. Rhodes nodded slowly. Myra giggled. She beat him half to death. Rhodes froze. Noted. Myra tapped her chin thoughtfully. But who knows? Maybe you are exactly her type. I value my life, thank you. Rhodes gave an exasperated look. Miss Myra, your mischievous side is getting more and more obvious. And also, do you just enjoy gossip? Being a waiter in Fairy Tale's tavern was a strange mix of peaceful, noisy, and sometimes downright dangerous. If you weren't fast enough, you could accidentally get caught in a brawl. If you were smart enough, you could enjoy the show from a safe distance. Of course, even while watching, you had to dodge flying bottles, chairs, and occasionally an entire table. But at lunchtime, Rhodes unlocked one of the greatest perks of this job, a free meal. And today's meal was Fairy Tale's special casserole. Rhodes had never heard of this dish before, but the second the lid was lifted, his nose and stomach had already reached a verdict. That smell! It was so good that even Worm, who had been completely knocked out from drinking with Kana, suddenly woke up, following the aroma like a hungry little spirit. Inside the thick, simmering broth, pieces of tender chicken legs, juicy pork, sausages, and creamy white beans were perfectly arranged. A thin, golden brown crispy layer floated on top, glistening with rich, flavorful goodness. Rhodes was already drooling. Myra and Lockie took their seats. All right, let's eat. Myra said cheerfully. Rhodes didn't even hesitate. He scooped up a spoonful of broth and took his first sip. And in that moment, his soul ascended. The soup was rich, thick, and absolutely bursting with umami. Rhodes put his spoon down dramatically and clapped his hands in appreciation. This would be absolutely perfect with rice. Wow! The chicken thigh is crispy and golden on the outside, yet juicy and tender on the inside. It's already amazing, but with the soup? Even better. Whoa, this pork is incredible too. So flavorful. And even the beans. Why are they this good? Rhodes had completely lost himself in the meal, turning into a wow monster, exclaiming about every single bite. But soon, he realized that talking was slowing him down. After a brief internal struggle, he made the wise decision. Eat first. Talk later. 20 minutes later. Rhodes and Worm were both stuffed. Leaning back, Rhodes patted his stomach in satisfaction. He looked at the now empty casserole dish and pointed at it. Wait. This was an employee meal. He still couldn't believe it. This looks way too complicated to make for staff, right? Myra thought for a second before casually listing the steps. Not really. You just boil white beans, onions, carrots, tomatoes, thyme, and pork skin into a thick soup. Meanwhile, you fry the chicken, pork, and sausages. Then you layer everything in the casserole dish, pour the soup over it, bake for a while, and it's ready. Rhodes sat there in utter disbelief. Not really complicated, she says. Holding Worm on his lap, he absent-mindedly rubbed the little fluff ball while feeling like he had just witnessed culinary wizardry. At this moment, one thing became clear in his mind. Myra, I want to work as a waiter here forever. Lockie chuckled. Looks like Rhodes is very satisfied with the contents that filled his stomach this time. Satisfied? That's an understatement. Rhodes thought about her wording for a second. Wait. The contents of my stomach? Myra noticed his confused expression and waved a hand dismissively. Please don't learn common speech from Loki. Sis, that's rude. Loki pouted. I have a poetic way of speaking, okay? Sure, Myra humored her, then turned back to Rhodes. But you're still a beginner with the language, so let's not get you learning Loki's poetic phrases just yet, okay? Ugh, whatever. Loki pouted and began clearing the dishes. Rhodes had the afternoon off, so he decided to follow Makarov's advice and visit the guild's library. Elfman had already dragged him there once before. The inside was a bit dim, but the tall wooden bookshelves were packed with countless books, stretching all the way to the ceiling. Next to them stood movable ladders, perfect for grabbing books from the highest shelves. The library was as quiet as ever in the afternoon, filled with the distinct scent of old books. Woo, woo. Worm let out a small whimper, clearly not a fan of the place. SHH. Rhodes gestured for silence, picking up the little fluff ball and placing it on his shoulder. Without thinking, he lightened his footsteps, as if respecting the atmosphere of the library. Following the signs hanging from the shelves, Rhodes navigated to the magic section, scanning the titles for anything related to his abilities. But to his disappointment, there was no book titled Celestial Spirit Magic. The guildmaster said there were materials here. Rhodes murmured to himself. Maybe it's classified under a broader category. He flipped back a few shelves and found a book titled Encyclopedia of Magic. Opening the table of contents, he noticed that magic was divided into two main categories. Ability-based magic, where magic is directly channeled through one's own power, like elemental or enhancement magic. Possession-based magic, where magic relies on external mediums, such as items, contracts, or spirits, like requip magic or celestial spirit magic. Since the guildmaster said my magic is closer to celestial spirit magic, that means it's a possession-based type. Rhodes was about to flip to that section, but first, he followed the universal rule of picking up a book randomly, open a page and see what's inside. Chapter 13, Shadow Gear. Takeover Magic, a type of magic that allows the user to absorb the power of an animal, granting enhanced physical abilities. However, there are significant risks if a mage attempts to absorb a creature that is too powerful, and their own strength or willpower is insufficient. They may lose control or even go berserk until they collapse from exhaustion. The basic training methods for this magic are as follows. Snap. Rhodes slammed the book shut and stared at the cover in disbelief. It was just a regular encyclopedia, yet it contained actual training methods for different types of magic. Was this something he was even allowed to read for free? Thud. Worm tumbled off Rhodes' shoulder and landed right on the book's cover. The little furball blinked drowsily, looking utterly confused. Rhodes sighed. Yeah, I can tell you're not exactly a scholar. Picking Worm up and placing him back on his shoulder, Rhodes hugged the massive encyclopedia and hurried out of the library. He needed to confirm if this was really okay. The Encyclopedia of Magic? Of course, you can read it, Myra reassured him with a warm smile. But it has actual training methods for different kinds of magic. Rhodes hesitated. Is that really okay? Myra tilted her head slightly, already guessing what he was worried about. That's the whole point of keeping books in the library, so people can learn magic, she explained. But aren't some of these techniques, dangerous? Myra giggled. Don't worry. Any magic that's truly dangerous wouldn't be left lying around. Hearing this, Rhodes nodded in relief. Oh. Then I'll go all out. Myra blinked. That's not how you use go all out in this context. Ignoring her correction, Rhodes waved a hand and hurried back to the library to dive into his reading. Flipping through the pages, Rhodes finally found an entry on celestial spirit magic. It was classified as a possession magic, since it required a contract with an external entity, rather than relying purely on one's own power. At the same time, it was also considered a type of spatial magic, as it involved summoning beings from another dimension. Celestial spirit magic was an ancient art, with a history spanning over 400 years. Each celestial spirit was tied to a constellation in the sky and required a specific key to be summoned. Ordinary spirits were linked to silver keys. The 12 most powerful spirits, known as the zodiac spirits, were summoned using golden keys. Since Rhodes was reading from an encyclopedia rather than a specialized book on celestial spirit magic, the information was relatively surface level. The training methods described in the book detailed how to open the celestial gate using a key and the steps required to form a contract with a celestial spirit. However, Rhodes had already learned the most important parts from Master Makarov. For more advanced knowledge, such as the deeper principles of ancient magic and spatial magic, he would need to find specialized books. He glanced at the vast rows of bookshelves. This was going to be a massive undertaking. Rhodes buried himself in reading for several hours. Meanwhile, Worm had spent the entire time alternating between sleeping and waking up on the desk. Eventually, the little furball woke up from hunger and let out a soft, pleading woo, reminding Rhodes that it was almost dinner time. Rhodes stood up and stretched his arms. He checked the time and realized it was almost 5 o'clock. Wow! I've been working harder than I ever did in school. He muttered, shaking his head in amusement. At this rate, I'll become a magic master in no time. Woo woo woo. Worm's little horns drooped as if urging him to stop bragging and hurry up. But there was no rushing this. Rhodes had to carefully return the book to its original place and make a quick stop at the washroom to clean his hands before heading back to the guild tavern to start his evening shift. Back at the guild tavern. As a waiter, Rhodes' mealtime was either before or after the usual rush. This way, when the evening crowd arrived, he wouldn't be too busy to eat. Tonight, Rhodes and Myra opted to eat a little early, along with some of the other staff. However, the moment a customer walked in, someone had to set down their food and go take the order, which was quite a hassle. Just as Rhodes was about to take another bite. Myra! We're back! A cheerful voice called out as a blue-haired girl walked into the tavern, followed by 2 tall, lanky young men. Myra immediately set down her chopsticks and turned toward the newcomers with a bright smile. Levy! Welcome back! Jet and Roy, too. The guild members scattered around the tavern turned toward the entrance, greeting the trio warmly. From the way everyone reacted, it was clear that these 3 were well liked in Fairy Tale. Myra stepped forward, her expression filled with curiosity. You're 2 days later than expected. Did the mission go well? Yeah. Levy said excitedly. The client was really nice. He even invited us to stay a couple of extra days at the shop. Hey, Myra put on a playfully stern expression. You know that accepting extra rewards without approval is against the rules, right? It wasn't an extra reward. Levy clung to Myra's arm and spoke in a slightly whiny tone, her voice full of charm. The client just wanted to make sure we were available in case anything else came up. He called it after-sales service or something like that. Levy was petite and cute, standing only slightly above Myra's shoulders. When she snuggled up to Myra like this, she looked even more adorable, at least, Jet and Roy certainly thought so. They both wore envious expressions, though, they were envious of Myra. Myra gave Levy a teasing look before sighing in defeat. Fine, I'll let it slide this time. Thanks, big sis Myra. Levy beamed as she let go and handed over the mission report for registration. So, did anything change while we were gone? Levy asked as she leaned forward on the counter, propping herself up on her toes. Myra smiled as she checked the report. Not much, but we did get a new member recently. Actually, he wanted to ask for your help a few days ago because of some language issues. Levy's eyes lit up with curiosity. Oh? What happened? As a letter magic user, Levy's ability allowed her to create words out of magic, giving them real effects. For example, if she wrote the word fire, it would ignite into real flames. Because of her unique magic, she had an in-depth knowledge of languages, including ancient scripts, and was always fascinated by anything related to words and text. Seeing her interest, Myra chuckled. Well, let me explain. While finalizing the mission registration, Myra gave Levy a quick summary about Rhodes and his situation. I'll introduce you to him later, Myra finished with a gentle smile. I'm sure he could use your help right now. Jet and Roy, who stood behind Levy like 2 loyal knights, immediately caught onto a crucial detail. They said in unison, their expressions sharpening as if sensing an impending challenge. At that moment, Rhodes had just finished his meal and was heading over to take over his shift. Myra took the opportunity to introduce them. Rhodes, these are Levy, Jet, and Roy. Rhodes had already heard Loki mention their names earlier, but before he could properly greet them, Jet suddenly jumped onto a nearby table. Levy followed suit, gracefully hopping onto a stool, while Roy propped one foot on a chair and the other on the table, striking a dramatic pose. With synchronized energy, the 3 of them proudly declared, "We are Shadow Gear." The guild members nearby, who had been drinking peacefully, were so startled by the sudden outburst that they nearly spat out their drinks. Rhodes, on the other hand, was completely speechless. Watching the 3 strike their signature over-the-top pose, his mind immediately went to Team Rocket from an entirely different world. With a hand raised mid-air, he found himself unsure whether to applaud their enthusiasm or cringe from second-hand embarrassment. Leaning toward Myra, he covered his mouth with one hand and whispered, they're not the type that constantly stirs up trouble, right? Myra placed a thoughtful finger on her chin. How should I put it? Compared to Natsu, they cause far less trouble. Rhodes' expression darkened. By now, he had fully grasped Natsu's reputation, a walking disaster who spent most of his job earnings on damage compensation. If these three were being compared favorably to Natsu, it meant, they were still somewhat of a handful. He sighed. That's not exactly reassuring. His gaze shifted back to Levy, petite and undeniably adorable. Was it really possible that someone this cute could be just as much of a troublemaker? Chapter 14, The Guild's reputation seems to be a problem. Then it's settled. I'll help you find the information you need and explain it to you, and in return, you'll teach me about native language. According to Myra, Levy loved books more than anyone and was probably the most knowledgeable person when it came to the Guild's library. Aside from magic, Rhodes also needed to learn about the history, geography, culture, and other aspects of this world. Levy would be the perfect person to ask. Even if she didn't know everything by heart, she knew exactly where to find the right books. With Levy's help, Rhodes' learning efficiency would increase significantly. And since Levy was also curious about Rhodes' native language, their arrangement was mutually beneficial. Of course, Jet and Droy weren't exactly thrilled about this. But since Rhodes hadn't shown any reaction to Levy that could be considered romantic, they held back their complaints. Still, Levy was adorable, yet Rhodes hadn't reacted at all. That, too, was somehow upsetting. At first, Rhodes didn't understand the strange shifts in Jet and Droy's expressions, but later, Myra gave him some insider knowledge along with a bit of gossip. Apparently, the three had grown up together, and Jet and Droy had recently been researching the best ways girls express love. Rhodes suddenly had an epiphany. So, they were no, that wasn't polite. They were Levy's personal guards. However, when he looked at the two of them, he couldn't help but feel a little disturbed. Levy looked like a middle schooler, right? Isn't this a crime? Myra stifled a laugh, covering her mouth. Levy is already 16. She'd be devastated if she heard you say that. Rhodes paused. He remembered that Myra was 18, and a 2-year age gap didn't seem too bad. Wait a minute, Rhodes said, 16 is still a minor. Not in theory, Myra corrected with a smirk. Here, you can drink, and do all sorts of things at 15. To emphasize her point, she pointed toward Kana, who was half drunk and hugging a barrel. For example, Kana's been drinking since she was 13. Oh. Rhodes wasn't convinced. Something about Myra's example felt questionable. But then again, it was fairy tale. If there was one thing that was clear, it was that nobody here followed the rules. The agreement with Levy would officially begin tomorrow. She had just returned from a long journey and needed time to rest before diving into study sessions. Jet and Droy were particularly energetic, chatting non-stop about their latest adventure with guild members they were familiar with. Rhodes watched them with a tinge of envy. He needed to learn magic as soon as possible so that he could experience this magical world firsthand instead of just hearing about it from others. Of course, the real priority was making money and paying off his debts faster. He had never been the type to splurge in the first place, but now, carrying such a huge debt made him feel restless. The tavern buzzed with life during dinner time, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and lively conversations. Rhodes, just like the night before, wiped down tables, swept the floors, and did his best to help out where needed. Once his shift was over, he picked up Worm, his little furball companion, and headed back to his rented room. The room was as dark and quiet as yesterday, carrying an undeniable sense of emptiness. But Worm sniffing curiously around like a puppy added a hint of warmth to the otherwise lonely space. Letting his tiny companion explore, Rhodes sat cross-legged on his bed and began meditating just as he had earlier in the day. He needed to train his mind. He needed to strengthen his magic. Only through hard work and discipline could he increase the magic energy within his body. It wasn't until fatigue finally set in that he washed up quickly, blew out the oil lamp, and went to sleep. Before drifting off, he thought to himself. This oil lamp is such a hassle, I'll have to buy a magic lamp sooner or later. Late that night, Worm, who had been curled up near Rhodes' pillow like a fluffy little ball, remained silent and still. Until, Sometime before dawn, his small body gradually became transparent and disappeared. Yet, despite the absence, Rhodes felt oddly warm and comfortable in his sleep. The next morning, as sunlight filtered in, Rhodes woke on time, got up, and went about his morning routine. After making his bed and preparing to leave, he suddenly felt like something was missing. Wait! Where's my Poro? Rhodes frowned and bent down to check under the bed. Warm. He looked around, searching every corner of the small room. Nothing. Then, as the realization dawned on him, he smacked his forehead. Oh right, I can just use magic to track him. Rhodes closed his eyes and focused. His magic felt noticeably stronger than yesterday. Oddly enough, it didn't seem to be depleting at all. Is there a time limit? Or does it automatically return while I'm asleep? He wasn't entirely sure. There was only one way to find out. Taking a deep breath, he decided to summon Warm again. I am the one who bridges two worlds. You, a creature of the other realm, heed my call and step through the gate. The pendant in his hand began to glow with golden and blue light, the magic in the air gathering around him. Clutching the pendant tightly, he shouted the final incantation. Open the gate of the other world. A small amount of magic drained from his body. A familiar white figure materialized on the floor. Warm blinked groggily, clearly confused at first. Then, the moment it registered Rhodes' presence, it sprang into his arms and nuzzled against him. Rhodes chuckled. You've got some impressive jumping skills. He caught Warm effortlessly, rubbing its tiny head before asking. Were there any other creatures near you just now? Warm shook its head. It had simply been sleeping in its nest. Rhodes frowned slightly, deep in thought. I could sense something else, like I was about to summon another creature, but I don't know what it was. Warm's dark, beady eyes stared at him completely blank. Not a trace of wisdom. Not a hint of understanding. Only pure, unfiltered cluelessness. Rhodes sighed and patted Warm's fluffy head. Yeah, I figured you wouldn't know. He gently placed Warm back down, then turned his attention to the pendant once more. All right, let's try this again. Just as the pendant began to glow, Rhodes abruptly stopped. Wait. I probably shouldn't test this inside my house. Something about summoning unknown creatures in a rented room felt like a bad idea. With that thought, he grabbed Warm and stood up. Let's go ask the guild master instead. Rhodes picked up Warm, locked the door behind him, and headed downstairs. Goodman was already at his stall, having set everything up earlier than usual. He greeted him with a friendly smile. Good morning, Mr. Rhodes. His gaze soon fell upon Warm, whose big pink tongue lolled out lazily. Oh? Is this your pet? At that moment, a very important realization struck Rhodes. Did landlords have a problem with tenants keeping pets? Luckily, Warm wasn't exactly a pet in the traditional sense. His name's Warm. I actually summoned him from another world using magic. Rhodes explained. Then, turning to Warm, he instructed, go on, say hello. Warm let out a soft, adorable sound. Goodman's eyes widened slightly in fascination. Magic? No wonder I've never seen anything like it before. He then chuckled to himself, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Maybe I should have my son learn magic when he grows up. Rhodes' face lit up. You have a son? That's great. He can join Fairy Tail someday. Ha! Ha ha! Why yet? That would be interesting. For some reason, Goodman's laughter sounded oddly forced. Rhodes, completely unaware of Fairy Tail's dual reputation, didn't quite grasp why the mere mention of his guild could make someone hesitant. Fairy Tail was one of the most famous wizard guilds in the entire country, a name that inspired both admiration and slight wariness. For wizards, joining Fairy Tail was a dream. It was a place of great camaraderie, unshakable bonds, and overwhelming strength. For ordinary townsfolk, it was a bit more complicated. Sure, wizards were generally good people, and the members of Fairy Tail were known for their unwavering sense of justice. But then, there was the other part of their reputation. They were also known for being destructive, chaotic, masters at causing collateral damage. Always compensating for said damage but still, causing it. Goodman's biggest concern wasn't that wizards were dangerous. It was that Fairy Tail was full of eccentric, unpredictable troublemakers. If he sent his child to join them, what would happen? Would he suddenly develop a reckless personality? Would he start destroying buildings for fun? Would he turn their house into a battle arena? Goodman wasn't sure if he was ready for that. For now, he just gave Rhodes a smile and made a mental note. Watching fairy tale wizards fight was fun and exciting. Raising one, however, that was a decision that required some serious thought. Chapter 15, Goodbye, the beautiful heroes I admire. The guild was less than a kilometer away, and at a leisurely pace, it would take no more than 15 minutes to get there. However, the enticing aromas from the breakfast stalls and bakeries along the way proved to be a challenge for Rhodes' self-control. Worm had it even worse. The little creature had his tongue hanging out, his wide eyes darting around, not knowing which delicious scent to follow. The variety of food here was as diverse as the people's fashion styles. After much consideration, Rhodes settled on a bun shop, purchasing 2 steaming hot meat buns, one for himself and one for Worm. He only ate half before giving the rest to Worm. Times were still tough for him. Until he had more money, he decided he should be more frugal. Instead of spending on street food, he figured it would be smarter to eat a proper meal at the guild, where he could get a full bowl of noodles. Worm, however, was completely overjoyed. Perhaps it was because the Howling Abyss, where he originally came from, lacked abundant resources. Whatever the reason, this little guy was not picky about food at all. Good morning, Myra. Good morning, Rhodes. Good morning, Worm. Not long after, Loki finally arrived, a bit out of breath. Sorry, I lost track of time while organizing my collection this morning. Myra simply smiled. It's okay. There's not much to do this morning, and now we have Rhodes to help. Rhodes, curious, tilted his head. Collection. Considering Loki's would make magic, Rhodes instinctively guessed she might collect wooden carvings. Myra's smile deepened. Loki's collection is very interesting. The way she said that immediately put Rhodes on high alert. He had already learned that Myra had a mischievous side. And from the amused look on her face, he could tell that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be simple. Unfortunately, boys aren't allowed in the girls' dormitory. Loki adjusted her glasses. But I could bring a piece or two to show you next time. A glint of white light reflected off her lenses, making Rhodes even more uneasy. Just to be sure, he hesitated, it's nothing terrifying, right? Of course not. They're all very cute collections. Rhodes' skepticism only deepened. Myra still wouldn't say anything more, only flashing a knowing smile as if she were anticipating his reaction when he eventually found out. Well, he'd know sooner or later. For now, Rhodes set aside his curiosity and focused on the more immediate priority food. Rhodes ate a full bowl of noodles before getting to work. By then, the guild had become lively. Makarov had arrived, dressed casually, carrying his wooden staff, and sitting cross-legged on the counter just like always. He watched over the chaotic, rowdy wizards of fairy tale with an expression of quiet amusement. To an outsider, he might have seemed like nothing more than a kind old man. Rhodes, however, knew better. Once he finished his morning duties, Rhodes wasted no time. Master, regarding my magic, there's something I'd like you to explain without holding back. He stepped forward, determined to understand the strange feeling he had earlier. Makarov, still calmly watching over the guild's antics, slowly turned his gaze to Rhodes. Is that so? Then let's give it a try. Let's go to the back of the guild. Makarov was secretly touched by Rhodes' consideration. For a fairy tale wizard to actually ask for guidance before attempting something potentially dangerous now, that was a rare sight. At this rate, the stability rate of the guild members might even exceed 90%. A miracle. Also, just so you know, explain without holding back is an incorrect phrase to use in that context. Oh. Rhodes nodded absent-mindedly, taking the correction in stride. Before heading out, he went to inform Myra of what he was doing, deciding to leave Worm behind so the little guy could play around in the tavern. Then, he followed Makarov to the back door of the guild. The back courtyard of Fairy Tale was spacious and peaceful, surrounded by a bluestone wall. In the center of the iron gate was the Fairy Tale emblem, proudly displayed. Rhodes curiously peered through the gaps in the gate. Beyond it, an endless stretch of shimmering water came into view. The morning sun cast an orange-red glow over the waves, its golden light scattering across the surface with the rippling breeze. It was breathtaking. For Rhodes, someone who lacked self-discipline, this was the first time in years that he had actually seen the sunrise. So there's an ocean behind the guild? He asked in awe. Makarov chuckled. No, it's a lake. Just an extremely large one. Realizing Rhodes was still lacking some common knowledge, he took the chance to explain further. Magnolia is an inland city. If you want to see the real ocean, you'll need to take a train to Harjan. It's a port town, beautiful scenery, good seafood. A port city, hey? Then I'll definitely have to visit someday. Another small goal was added to Rhodes' ever-growing list. Makarov smiled approvingly. For someone who had lost their place in the world, it was important to have things to look forward to, whether it was learning magic, exploring new places, or finding a purpose. As long as Rhodes had ambitions, he was moving in the right direction. All right, let's begin. Got it. Rhodes clutched the pendant hanging around his neck and began to chant the incantation. Once again, a vortex formed at his feet. However, this time, it didn't carry the biting cold wind from before. Instead, a moist, damp air rose up, the scent of fresh water lingering in the air. Through the swirling portal, the faint shadows of water plants could be seen swaying beneath the rippling surface. Then the vortex vanished. Rhodes suddenly felt a huge wave of his magic being drained, as if a floodgate had burst open. In an instant, nearly all of his energy was gone. As the magical ripples spread across the ground, a large creature slowly emerged. It was green-shelled, nearly 1.5 meters tall and around 2 meters long. The creature before them had 6 legs, a pair of short claws, and 2 large green eyes perched on its head. Extending from either side were a set of tentacle-like appendages that oddly resembled twin ponytails. Compared to a regular crab, it looked wider, rounder, and stubbier, yet still larger than an average van. Makarov tilted his head up to examine the towering crustacean. Is this a crab? Rhodes, already aware of its identity the moment it was summoned, gave a somewhat uncertain nod. Yet. It's called the Scuttler crab. It comes from the river in Summoner's Rift. As for its special traits, well, it runs really fast. The Scuttler crab was a familiar sight to Rhodes. It was a creature from the game League of Legends. Unlike Poro, which functioned more like a cute mascot, the Kenyan Scuttler crab was a neutral entity better known as a wild monster. In the game, defeating it granted experience and gold, but more importantly, it provided valuable map vision for the team. However, there was one crucial detail. This thing couldn't fight back. Back in older versions of the game, there were rumors that the Scuttle crab once had an attack stat, but when Rhodes started playing, it had already become a defenseless, non-aggressive wild monster. All it did was run away the moment it was attacked. It was a creature Tatsuya, his old gaming friend, loved farming the most. Almost every time before or after roaming to assist Rhodes, he would make sure to take out a Scuttler first. Rhodes could almost hear his friend's voice in his head. Kills? Whatever. But the Scuttle? That thing's mine. Rhodes let out a sigh. His second summoned creature was yet another one with little to no offensive power. But what was even more concerning was the realization that his summoning magic might not be taking the route he had envisioned. Rhodes had once dreamed of summoning legendary warriors, mystical creatures, or at least powerful heroes. Yet, standing before him was a massive river crab. He clutched the pendant Tatsuya had given him, his emotions a mix of frustration and resignation. Of course, it had to be a necklace from an arrogant jungler. But complaints aside, he still needed to train his magic. Even if it wasn't what he had originally envisioned, being able to summon creatures at all was still impressive. After all, if one day he could summon a small dragon, or even a giant one, wouldn't that make him invincible? For now, though, he had to deal with the reality before him. Rhodes took a closer look at the Kenyan Scuttler crab, its sheer size larger than he had expected. But when he thought about how big it was in the game compared to the champions, maybe this was accurate after all. Although in the game, it had no offensive capabilities, in real life. If something this big charged at someone, wouldn't that be fatal? Rhodes felt the magical link between himself and the Scuttler crab. With Makarov standing beside him, he took a deep breath and cautiously stepped forward. The crab, sensing Rhodes' intention, bent down obediently, lowering its tentacle-like appendages. Rhodes hesitated, then reached out and placed his hand between them, a pat on the head, so to speak. It felt cold and slightly damp, but thankfully, it didn't smell like fish. Do you have any hidden abilities that I don't know about? Rhodes asked, half hopeful. After all, game mechanics might not work the same way in this magical world. He had asked the same question to Worm before. And in response, Worm had proudly demonstrated a set of powerful abilities, hugging legs, jumping into his arms, eating. That was it. Now, Rhodes could only pray that the Scuttler crab had something more useful to offer. Chapter 16, Scout, the Rift Scuttler. Just as Rhodes posed his question, he suddenly saw himself. Not through his own eyes. Not like looking into a mirror. But from below, gazing up at his own face from an odd, low angle. His hand was resting on his head, partially blocking the view. Yet, because his new line of sight was spread wide apart, he could still clearly make out his own expression. Wait, what? Was this, the Scuttler crab's perspective? A strange, dual vision effect flooded Rhodes' mind, one from his own eyes and another from the crab's, both feeding into his brain simultaneously. Experimenting, Rhodes pulled his hand back and immediately saw the action from two angles at once. When the crab stood up, its height adjusted the perspective slightly. When it turned, Rhodes saw a full 300-degree view around himself. Makarov stroked his beard in understanding after Rhodes' excited but slightly confused explanation. Ah, I see. This is a reconnaissance-type summon. It should be quite useful. Rhodes blinked. Reconnaissance? So, was this thing a glorified walking security camera? Next, they tested the crab's mobility. Rhodes, hesitantly, climbed onto its hard shell-like back, gripping the two tentacle-like appendages that acted as reins. The crab moved. No, it bolted. With frightening speed, the scuttle crab smashed through the guild wall and dashed towards the lake, completely ignoring obstacles in its way. Rhodes barely had time to scream before they hit the water, only to find himself gliding effortlessly across the lake's surface. The scuttle crab was walking on water. Its 6 legs moved in a smooth, synchronized motion, allowing it to traverse the water like a flat, skimming stone. Rhodes clutched the tentacle reins tightly, feeling the rush of wind and the occasional splash of water. He wasn't sure how fast they were going, but it felt way faster than a regular horse. In fact, this was more exhilarating than a jet ski ride on Thr Lake, though that might have been because he wasn't wearing a life jacket. From the shore, Makarov analyzed the scuttle crab's abilities with an experienced eye. Faster than a normal horse or a boar horse. Good mobility. Water traversal is an excellent bonus. Destructive power? Average, but... Then, he turned his head, and finally noticed the gaping hole in the guild's outer wall. Even so, don't go smashing through the guild like that. His voice boomed across the lake, making Rhodes flinch. My bad. Later, back on land, Rhodes rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry. This was my first time riding a giant crab, so I didn't really know how it handled. Rhodes had to postpone his appointment with Levy. Originally, Rhodes had planned to study at the library with Levy. Now? He was stuck rebuilding a wall under Makarov's watchful eye. Not quite the same thing. Of course, skill wasn't a requirement. The guildmaster was happy to teach on the spot, given his vast experience in structural damage control, mostly because he'd been responsible for destroying the guild as many times as everyone else combined. At this point, Makarov had become an expert out of necessity. Just a small wall problem. Levy, on the other hand, didn't seem bothered at all by the situation. It's fine. Just a little wall damage, no big deal. Rhodes couldn't tell if she was being reassuring or if she had just seen too much destruction to care anymore. She held up a book she had brought along, a small smile on her face. Anyway, I found a good common knowledge book. Since we can't go to the library, I'll just read some interesting parts to you now. Rhodes lit up instantly. That's amazing. Thanks, Levy. Back in his old life, he used to listen to music or comedy skits while cleaning. Having something to pass the time made things way less dull. And Levy was really considerate. No wonder Jet and Droy liked her so much. Lesson 1, The Kingdom of Fiori. Levy opened the book and began reading in her clear, soft voice. First of all, this country is called the Kingdom of Fiori. It has a population of approximately 17 million and is located on the western peninsula of Ishgar. Around 160 years ago, it was officially recognized as a neutral nation. Levy's voice as she read and explained had a pleasant rhythm to it. As Rhodes continued laying bricks for the wall, he absorbed the information. Hearing that Fiori had a population of about 17 million, he figured it wasn't a particularly large country. Being a neutral nation was a relief, at least there was no immediate threat of war. Magnolia, where we are now, is located in the eastern part of the Kingdom of Fiori, close to the border with Bosco. The city has a population of about 60,000. Rhodes had heard Myra mention this before. Magnolia was well known for its deep connection with magic and was considered one of the more prosperous cities in Fiori. And now comes the important part, Levy emphasized. In the past, magic was something people feared, and wizards were often persecuted. Additionally, frequent battles between wizards caused instability throughout the world. To change this, 150 years ago, the first wizard guild in history, Magia Dragon, was established. Wizards began to unite, using their magic to protect themselves and their companions. They also sought to build better relationships with ordinary people, helping them solve problems in exchange for rewards. This led to the formation of many wizard guilds, gradually integrating magic into everyday life. Over time, wizards and regular citizens began to coexist in harmony. Then, 97 years ago, in the year X686, our guild, Fairy Tale, was founded. Levy's tone grew warmer as she recited a well-known phrase. Do fairies have tails? Do fairies even exist at all? No one knows for sure. And that means endless mystery, and endless adventure. This is the meaning that the first guild master, Mavis, gave to Fairy Tale. Levy's eyes sparkled as she spoke, her enthusiasm shining through. It was clear that she truly loved this guild. This was the first time Rhodes had heard the meaning behind Fairy Tale's name, and he found it oddly romantic. So romantic, in fact, that he didn't retain much of the history of Fiori that Levy had just explained. But it wasn't a complete loss, he still learned some valuable information. At the very least, Rhodes now understood that Fiori functioned under a somewhat feudal monarchy. There was a king, ministers, knights, and a standing army. Naturally, the royal family and their trusted officials had access to magic, and wizards were highly regarded in many parts of the country. However, unlike nobles who held titles and privileges, wizards regardless of their power were still considered ordinary citizens under the jurisdiction of the monarchy. Additionally, to maintain stability in the magical world, there existed an organization called the Magic Council, which was responsible for overseeing wizards, issuing sanctions, and dismantling dark guilds. Yet, when Levy mentioned the Magic Council, her expression shifted, an almost imperceptible look of unease crossed her face. Rhodes found it strange. Why would a legal guild like Fairy Tale be wary of an organization that existed to uphold order? Wait. That's when it hit him. I never actually asked the most important question. Fairy Tale is a legal guild, right? Spending time with Levy was surprisingly enjoyable. Whether she was explaining history, geography, or the fundamentals of magic, she did so in a structured and methodical way. For someone like Rhodes, who lacked a strong foundation in these subjects, her lessons were easy to follow. More importantly, she often accompanied her explanations with related stories, making it even more engaging. It amazed Rhodes how much broader Levy's knowledge was compared to even some of the seniors from his old world. As Rhodes neared completion of the repairs on the guild's courtyard wall, Levy, having talked for quite some time, paused and gave him a rather expectant look. Oh, right. My native language. Rhodes immediately understood what she wanted. Let me wash my face first. Truthfully, he wanted a full shower and a change of clothes after working for so long. Being covered in dirt and dust felt awful. If you want to wash your face, I can help. Solid script, water. Levy waved her hand, tracing the word water in the air with her finger. As soon as she finished writing, the glowing magical letters transformed into an actual floating body of water, shimmering in midair. Rhodes blinked in surprise. Curious, he dipped his hands into the floating water just as if he were using a real wash basin. He could even scoop some up and splash it onto his face. What an incredibly useful magic. It's almost like... I don't know how to describe it. Something straight out of a fantasy novel. Just say the word and it happens. Hee. It's not that impressive, Levy chuckled, slightly embarrassed by his praise. Once Rhodes was finished washing up, she controlled the water script, letting it disperse naturally into the lake. I'm not that skilled at it yet. My magic is mostly for support. I can only provide minor assistance during battle. I think this kind of magic has a lot of potential. Rhodes was fascinated. Solid script felt similar to certain magic systems he had read about in fantasy novels where simply writing a word could bring it to life. The applications of this power could be endless. Well then, let me teach you the basic pronunciations. Taking the light pen Levy had just used, Rhodes began writing the fundamental initials and finals in the air. After some thought, he marked them using the phonetic equivalents of the language spoken in this world, carefully teaching her how to pronounce each one. Levy followed along with great enthusiasm, taking notes diligently. She didn't stop practicing until Loki came by to call Rhodes back to work. Chapter 17, Fairy Queen. That afternoon, the tavern was even noisier than the day before. The main reason? Natsu had returned from his mission, and Grey was still here. The two of them had started off standing at opposite ends of the guild, a good 10 meters apart. But as soon as their eyes met, for no apparent reason, the insults started flying. Droopy eyes. Natsu barked. Ice bastard. Grey shot back immediately, hanging eyes. Flame idiot. It took less than 10 seconds before their foreheads collided, and just like that, they were throwing punches. Unlike Macau and Wakaba, who at least held back a little during their fights, these two had no restraint whatsoever. Within moments, a stool leg went flying, smashing straight into Elfman's back. That's manly. Elfman roared, throwing himself into the fray with his fists raised only to be promptly sent flying by both Natsu and Grey at the same time. His airborne body crashed into Kaina's table, knocking over her wine. Kaina, naturally, did not take this well. Without hesitation, she grabbed her empty bottle and hurled it. Her target? Unclear. Her victim? A particularly handsome man who had been sitting nearby, casually entertaining two women in his arms. The bottle struck him squarely on the head. But instead of getting angry, the man simply let go of the women in the most graceful manner possible, straightened his collar, and murmured. Excuse me for a moment, ladies. I'll be joining in. He threw them a dazzling wink before stepping forward. The two women, utterly captivated, swooned on the spot and cheered him on. And just like that, the tavern descended into pure chaos. One after another, more guild members were dragged into the fight. Even Rhodes, who had been peacefully painting, Nab, who had been scanning the mission board, and Levy's entire team were caught in the whirlwind. Myra, as always, remained behind the counter, watching the madness unfold with a serene smile. Loki was already fighting. Of course, she was. That girl was never one to sit on the sidelines. Rhodes, on the other hand, made the very wise decision to abandon the plate of food he had been about to deliver and instead station himself safely next to the drunken guild master. The closer to Makarov, the safer he felt. Rather than watching the fight for fun, he kept his focus sharp on high alert for the inevitable airborne projectiles that could come flying at any moment. Having been a seasoned veteran of fairy tale for a whole 2 days now, Rhodes knew that survival required quick reflexes. The situation was escalating fast. It was only a matter of time before the brawl turned into a full-blown magic battle. At this point, Rhodes figured it was about time to wake the master up to put a stop to things. This felt like a routine procedure. But before he could make a move. Bang! The heavy doors of the guild swung open with force, slamming against the walls. Brilliant noonday sunlight streamed through the entrance, casting a long, slender shadow into the chaos of the tavern. A hush began to settle over the room. Someone had arrived. As Rhodes' eyes gradually adjusted to the light, the figure had already stepped inside with steady, confident strides. She had long, crimson hair cascading down her back and a strikingly delicate face, one that remained completely unreadable, betraying no emotion. Her black boots and blue skirt complemented her long, toned legs, yet she wore gleaming metal armor on her upper body, complete with shoulder plates, arm guards, and gauntlets. If she had been carrying a sword and had armor plating over her skirt, she would have looked like a full-fledged knight. But instead she was holding a thick, 3-meter-long rope in her hand. And at the other end of that rope? A massive flatbed cart, stacked sky-high with luggage. Rhodes stared. The pile of suitcases towered over her like a small mountain. His first thought? This woman was definitely strong. Then, as he noticed the unmistakable crimson hair, realization struck him. Myra mentioned her yesterday. This must be Urza. The moment Urza stepped through the doors, the guild previously roaring with chaos fell into an eerie silence. It was as if someone had slammed a pause button. People who had been grabbing each other's collars and throwing punches froze mid-motion. Myra, completely unfazed by the change in atmosphere, greeted her with a bright smile. Welcome back, Urza. Ah, I'm back. Urza responded politely, nodding to Myra. Then, she shifted her gaze across the guild. Instantly, her expression hardened. The silence deepened. A few brave souls tried to break the tension. Urza. Miss Urza, how did your mission go? Even the way they addressed her had changed, now laced with respectful honorifics. Urza wasn't buying it. Don't try to change the subject. I heard about the mess you lot caused again. A collective flinch rippled through the room. But Urza wasn't done yet. Let's start with the obvious. Vegeta, stop dancing on the table. The man immediately scrambled down, looking sheepish. Nab, quit loitering in front of the request board and pick a job. The man in question gulped and nodded, suddenly finding a mission very, very interesting. Wakaba, watch where your cigarette ash is going. The smoker quickly patted out any loose embers. And Kana, who had been casually sipping from her barrel, barely spared Urza a glance. What? Drink less. Kana snorted but made no move to argue. One by one, Urza called out nearly every troublemaker in the guild, naming them directly and reprimanding them for whatever chaos they had caused today. No one, not a single person, dared to talk back. But the funniest scene? Natsu and Grey, who had just been brawling moments ago, now stood arm in arm, grinning like best friends. Urza nodded in satisfaction. It's good that you two are getting along, but Grey, your clothes. Hey! Grey looked down, realizing he was in his underwear again. When did that happen? He frantically grabbed his pants and put them back on. However, Urza wasn't finished. She turned to the guild master and spoke sternly. Master, they're getting drunk in broad daylight again. Shouldn't you do something to restrain them a little? Makarov, sitting comfortably on the counter, waved a dismissive hand. What does it matter? He barely looked awake and even let out a small burp. Rhodes, who had been cautiously observing the situation, suddenly noticed something odd. The tavern had returned to its usual, lively atmosphere as if nothing had happened. The chaos from just moments ago, tables breaking, chairs flying, was now replaced with casual drinking and laughter. Even Natsu and Grey, who had been at each other's throats, were now sitting across from each other, clinking glasses with stiff smiles. But the moment Urza's gaze swept over them, their forced camaraderie became alarmingly enthusiastic. Haha! You're my best friend, Grey. Same to you, Natsu. Rhodes watched in quiet awe. She's basically the disciplinary officer of this place. Then, Urza's sharp gaze shifted to him. Rhodes felt a chill but quickly realized her expression was far from hostile. A new face, Urza observed. Are you a new recruit or a resident of Magnolia? Rhodes straightened up and greeted her politely. Hello, I'm Rhodes. I just joined the guild 2 days ago. I heard Myra mention your bad deeds before, they're quite legendary. The guild fell silent. Urza stiffened. Her expression faltered for the first time since entering the guild. She turned to Myra in shock. Bad deeds. For someone as proud and disciplined as Urza, hearing such a claim was a devastating blow. Myra, who had been casually wiping a glass behind the counter, sighed. It's not like that, Urza. Rhodes still has some issues with the common language. She quickly explained Rhodes' language struggles, making sure to clear her own name in the process. To put it simply, Rhodes is still learning magic and Fiori's common language. In the meantime, he's working as a temporary waiter at the tavern. Urza, now understanding the situation, softened a little. I see. I'm Urza. She crossed her arms and gave him a nod of approval. Since you've joined the guild, that means you're family now. If you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask me. She clenched her fist, her tone serious, her crimson hair swaying slightly with the movement. Urza took down dozens of criminals all by herself. Myra chuckled, resting her cheek on her hand. How about it? Our fairy queen is pretty cool, right? Rhodes nodded. Yeah, definitely cool. To be fair, Urza was incredibly strong, and her personality was, well, serious. She seemed like one of the few truly responsible people in the guild. And appearance-wise? She was just as stunning as Myra. Rhodes was sure that Urza was the object of admiration for many. But, he didn't dare have any romantic thoughts. Because Myra had already told him all about Urza's glorious battle records. Natsu, after challenging her, was beaten so badly that even Happy couldn't recognize him. Grey, caught wandering around half-naked, was nearly buried alive. And Loke, who tried to flirt with her, beaten within an inch of his life. Rhodes suddenly felt that calling Urza's history a bad deed earlier might not have been entirely wrong. At that moment, Myra noticed something. Loki? What's that? She had spotted Loki returning after sending Urza off. But this time, she was carrying a massive gift box over a meter tall. It's a souvenir Urza brought back for me. Loki happily set down the large red box with a loud thump. From the sound of it, it was really heavy. Chapter 18, The Women in the Guild Are Like Tigers. Urza, who looked so fierce and carried an almost terrifying presence, actually brought souvenirs for her guild mates? Rhodes found it a little hard to believe. He was curious what exactly was in that gift box. It wouldn't be armor, would it? I'll open it now. Loki eagerly laid the gift box flat, carefully pulled the bow-tied ribbon, and lifted the lid. Inside, gleaming metal reflected the light. What is this? Rhodes stared, confused. It wasn't armor, that much was clear. But it was definitely some kind of metalwork. At first glance, it resembled a statue of a woman, but there were some questionable gaps and handles on its surface. While Rhodes was still piecing things together, Loki had already gripped the handle and opened the statue, revealing a row of sharp, menacing spikes inside. Instead of recoiling in horror, Loki's face lit up with pure joy. Ah! It's an Iron Maiden! She exclaimed, practically glowing with excitement as she ran her hands over the cold steel. This is... Rhodes stammered, his brain short-circuiting as he instinctively took a step back. An Iron Maiden? That's a torture device. Didn't Urza say it was a local specialty? What kind of place sells these as souvenirs? And why would anyone give someone an Iron Maiden as a gift? Not to mention, if Loki could lift this without breaking a sweat, she had to be as insanely strong as Kana, right? The biggest question: why is she so happy about this? Myra, watching the scene unfold, smiled as if everything was perfectly normal. Urza is always so thoughtful with her gifts. Thoughtful? More like a warning message from the underworld. Rhodes turned to Myra, struggling to find the right words. Myra, are you sure this is a gift and not, a death threat? Myra giggled. Of course not. Loki loves collecting torture devices. This is actually the perfect gift for her. Myra tilted her head playfully. Hey, didn't I tell you? Loki's entire room is filled with torture devices. No, you did not tell me that. All Myra had said before was that Loki's collection was interesting. She even told him that he could visit it someday. Rhodes suddenly realized a major problem. All the girls in Fairy Tale Myra, Kana, Loki, Urza, they were all terrifying in their own way. Sure, they were all gorgeous, but they were also incredibly dangerous. At this point, only Levy seemed cute and normal. Myra, despite being somewhat trustworthy, still had a mischievous streak. Actually, now that he thought about it, he had a feeling there was a lot about Myra he still didn't know. Later that afternoon, with fewer chores to do, Rhodes finally had time to practice his magic. Meanwhile, Urza, now free from errands, was chatting with a tall girl with long green hair at one of the tables. Thanks to her presence, the guild was quieter than ever. But according to Myra, this silence wouldn't last. Everyone stays on their best behavior when Urza first returns, Myra whispered with a knowing smile. Give it an hour, they'll be just as noisy as before. Levy flipped through her small notebook, reviewing the pronunciation she had learned that morning. Whenever she saw Rhodes taking a break from practicing, she would seize the opportunity to ask him about a few character strokes, eagerly scribbling them down in her notes. Meanwhile, Makarov was helping Rhodes refine his summoning spell. Normally, celestial spirit wizards called upon their spirits by reciting their names while using the corresponding celestial keys. However, Rhodes only had a single pendant, which somehow connected to multiple summons at once. Right now, his only way of distinguishing them was by calling out their individual names. Makarov explained that once Rhodes became more proficient in magic, he could shorten the incantation, eventually reducing it to just a name, cutting out the lengthy spell casting altogether. For now, however, he needed to chant the full summoning spell whenever he sensed a new summon. Rhodes counted on his fingers, muttering to himself. Toad, 3 wolves, 6 birds, rock golem. These were the creatures he might be able to summon next. Rhodes sighed. Still a long way to go before I get to summon small dragons, let alone the big ones. Of course, he had no idea whether any of these so-called ordinary monsters had special abilities in this world. But judging by the sheer size of the Kenyan Scuttler crab he had summoned earlier, even creatures that were considered weak in the game like the 3 wolves or 6 birds might be absolute beasts in real life. Right now, though, his main priority was increasing his magic power and improving his summoning proficiency. When it came to magic power, there was only so much he could do in a day. Meditation had its limits, and he couldn't force his growth. But when it came to magic proficiency, that, at least, could be improved through repetition. Rhodes caught Worm, who had been cheating customers out of snacks in the tavern, and began practicing his dismissal spell, the magic that would send his summons back to their realm. He took a deep breath, focused his energy, and chanted. I am the one who bridges the 2 realms. Obey my will and return to the abyss, Poro. Worm's body gradually became transparent, its small figure fading before finally disappearing completely. Yes. Nailed it on the first try. Rhodes grinned. Now it was time to bring him back. Rhodes adjusted his stance, focused his magic, and recited the summoning spell once more. I am the one who opened the gate. Cross the boundary, and return Poro. A magical vortex swirled into existence before disappearing just as quickly, and there was Worm, standing right in front of him again. Nice. Let's do it again. Thus began Rhodes' endless loop of practice. Return to the abyss. Poro. Open the gate. Poro. Return. Open. Return. Open. Rhodes practiced the dismissal spells tirelessly, and Worm had no choice but to comply. At first, the repetition wasn't so bad, but after dozens, no, hundreds of times, the little guy started to get lazy. Sometimes, Worm would appear standing upright, other times sitting comfortably. On rare occasions, it would even materialize lying on its back, attempting to cross its stubby legs only to fail miserably. Worm grew more and more irritated, but Rhodes had no choice. It consumed the least magic power, making it the most efficient summon for repeated practice. If he tried summoning the Kenyan Scuttler crab instead, he would barely manage 2 attempts before draining himself completely. There'd be no way to repeat the process. Woo-ah, ah-achoo. After what felt like an eternity of summoning, Worm sneezed violently as soon as it materialized in the tavern. Its long tongue curled back, and a thick strand of snot dangled from its tiny nose. Rhodes' first reaction was, wait, you have a nose. Worm sniffled before turning its back to Rhodes, its little horns drooping in frustration, a clear sign that it was angry. The Howling Abyss was a land of eternal winter, yet here in Fiori, it was already summer. Tossing Worm back and forth between extreme cold and heat countless times had clearly taken its toll. Even a Poro was bound to catch a cold at this rate. Rhodes rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Ah! My bad. That's on me. Now, how do you cheer up an angry Poro? After thinking for a moment, Rhodes decided to take a gamble. Myra, I'd like an omelette. Worm's droopy horns perked up slightly. And a bowl of tomato and egg soup. Worm spun around instantly, tongue sticking out, pure joy radiating from its fluffy face. Even if Rhodes still wasn't completely sure what Worm loved most, he at least knew that eggs were high on the list. You're so easy to please. Rhodes chuckled and reached out skillfully, rubbing its head, horns, chin, and belly. Myra smiled warmly as she took his order. But just then, a sharp, slightly annoyed voice rang out from above. Oh? Are you finally done making a racket? You've been noisy for a while now. Rhodes looked up and met the gaze of a young man with blonde hair and a distinct lightning-shaped scar over his right eye. He wore headphones, a brown top, and a long coat draped over his shoulders which, considering it was summer, seemed a bit much. Leaning over the railing on the second floor, he rested one hand on it, his expression less than friendly as he stared Rhodes down. Chapter 19, A Restricted Area in the Guild? Laxus. Myra stepped in front of Rhodes, raising an arm to shield him. Rhodes is a new guild member. He joined just the day before yesterday. He was just practicing his magic. Laxus let out a sharp sneer. Magic? That? Don't make me laugh. What uses such pitifully weak magic? Worm trembled in fear, instinctively curling up. Rhodes frowned. This was, without a doubt, the worst attitude he'd encountered in the guild so far. Even poor Lyusika, who openly claimed to despise humans, still treated the wounded with care in her own way. But Laxus? He didn't just seem cold, he radiated condescension, looking at Rhodes like he was an insect beneath his boots. Rhodes had no intention of causing trouble so soon after joining. He took a deep breath and chose diplomacy. If I disturbed you, I apologize. Laxus' smirk deepened. Figures. Not just weak in magic, but weak in personality too. His tone was filled with utter disdain, as if the very idea of Rhodes existing in the same guild as him was offensive. I really don't get why the old man bothers taking in guys like you. Then, Laxus turned his gaze downward not just to Rhodes, but to everyone in the tavern. There are already enough weaklings in fairy tale. His eyes narrowed in contempt, voice dripping with scorn. Why are these kinds of people even allowed to call themselves my companions? Hey! His words ignited fury across the room. The entire tavern tensed, especially Natsu and Grey. The two, who had been keeping themselves in check under Urza's watchful presence, suddenly slammed their fists onto the table and stood up. The hell did you just say? The sharp clank of glasses being set down echoed from other tables. All eyes turned to Laxus, their expressions filled with disapproval and rising anger. TCH. That guy is still the same arrogant bastard. From the counter, Urza had stopped chatting with her friends. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. That was uncalled for, Laxus. Laxus' gaze met Urza's, and the air between them turned electric. For a moment, it was like a sword had been unsheathed. Oh! Laxus' lip curled in amusement. So, you're siding with these pathetic weaklings now, Urza. Just as things threatened to explode, a powerful voice intervened. Enough! Makarov, who had been lounging lazily before, was suddenly alert and sober. With a sharp slap, he smacked a mission request onto the counter. Laxus. His voice was firm. This request has your name on it. Go handle it now. Laxus turned to his grandfather, expecting a glare, but Makarov didn't even spare him a glance. Laxus exhaled sharply through his nose, his fists clenching. Finally, he clicked his tongue in irritation and snatched the mission paper off the counter. TCH. What a waste of time. Without another word, he strode out of the guild, slamming the doors behind him. As soon as he was gone, a wave of tension eased slightly, but the mood was still heavy. Everyone was still watching the door, murmuring discontentedly. Natsu looked like he was ready to sprint after Laxus for a fight, but Grey reacted instantly, locking an arm around his neck. Cool it, Flame Brain. Grey muttered, holding him in place. Grr. I just wanna knock that smug look off his face. And you'd end up electrocuted in 10 seconds. Natsu clicked his tongue in frustration, but stayed put. As Laxus exited the guild, 2 men and 1 woman silently rose from their seats in the corner of the tavern and followed behind him. A heavy silence lingered in the air for a moment after they left. Gradually, the tension dissipated as conversations resumed. The guild members returned to their seats, the noise slowly rising back to its usual lively atmosphere. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble for everyone. Rhodes felt that there was definitely something off about Laxus, but today's confrontation had started because of him. It would probably be best to practice magic in the courtyard next time. It has nothing to do with you. Loki pouted, crossing her arms. That guy's always like this. If he wasn't the guildmaster's grandson, he would have been kicked out ages ago. Loki. Myra gently cut her off. She wasn't defending Laxus' attitude, but Makarov was already carrying the weight of Laxus' behavior. There was no need to say something that would make him feel worse. Rhodes blinked in surprise. Wait, he's the master's grandson. His eyes flickered between Laxus, who had stormed out moments ago, and Makarov, the small yet powerful guild leader sitting nearby. I don't see the resemblance at all. Yet, Myra confirmed. But... Makarov sighed, his gaze lingering on the guild doors where Laxus had disappeared. Sorry. It's my fault Laxus turned out this way. Don't take what he said to heart. He sighed heavily, voice filled with unspoken regret. Rhodes waved his hands awkwardly. No, you don't have to apologize, Master. He could already guess the story behind Laxus just from the way everyone reacted. A child growing up under constant pressure, always hearing, "You're Makarov's grandson. You're destined for greatness." At first, it probably didn't bother him. But over time, Laxus must have grown frustrated. Wanting to be acknowledged for his own abilities, not just his lineage. Rhodes recalled a similar character from another world. Konohamaru from the next studio over was like that too. Except Laxus took the rebellious phase way too far. Rhodes tried to recall anything about Laxus' future but came up blank. Still, if Tatsuya had said it was a happy ending, then this guy would probably find his way back, eventually. The guild's usual bustling energy gradually returned. Laughter, shouting, and the occasional clinking of glasses filled the air again. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Night had fallen over Magnolia. The guild's lights flickered to life. Only a handful of guests remained in the tavern, chatting softly over their drinks. Rhodes grabbed a broom, ready to start sweeping the floor alongside Lockie. "I'll take care of the downstairs alone tonight," Lockie said apologetically. "I came in late this morning, after all." "Then I'll head upstairs," Rhodes offered. Lockie immediately stopped him. "No, Myra is the only one who cleans the second floor." "Hey!" Rhodes tilted his head in confusion. "Myra's been working hard all day. I don't mind helping." "Rules are rules," Lockie insisted, shaking her head. "Only certain people are allowed upstairs. Everyone else is strictly forbidden from going up." "Why?" Rhodes couldn't help but feel like this was straight out of a martial arts novel, a forbidden area within the guild. Lockie sighed before explaining. "Because there's a special request board on the second floor. It holds high-risk S-class missions." S-class? Yep. They're extremely difficult missions with huge rewards, but if you mess up, you could lose your life. Her expression grew serious. Only S-class wizards are allowed to accept them. That's why the second floor is off-limits to the rest of us. It made sense. S-class wizards were probably the strongest members of the guild. Rhodes thought for a moment before asking, "So they're the only ones allowed upstairs?" Lockie sighed helplessly. "It's not just about that. The real issue is the number of reckless idiots in this guild." Rhodes immediately understood. With a guild full of hot-blooded mages, it was probably a necessary rule. "Ah, makes sense," he muttered, recalling the chaos that unfolded earlier in the day. The members of Fairy Tale were enthusiastic, to say the least. Take Natsu, for example. The guy was as impulsive as they came, and he was the protagonist. It wouldn't be surprising if one day he snuck upstairs and tried to take an S-class mission just for the thrill of it. This rule might have been made just for people like him. No wonder they only trusted Myra, the most level-headed person in the guild, to handle anything upstairs. "By the way, how many S-class wizards are in the guild? And who's the strongest?" Rhodes asked, his curiosity piqued. Lockie tilted her head in thought. Lockie thought for a moment. Setting aside the guild master, the strongest should be that one older guy. But he went on a mission 2 years ago and hasn't returned since. 2 years? Rhodes was shocked. What kind of mission lasts that long? Is he okay? Lockie immediately waved her hands, shaking her head. No, don't worry. Guild Arts is basically a walking disaster. He's ridiculously strong, like, monstrous strong. I don't know what kind of mission he's on, but there's no way anything could happen to him. Her confidence in this Guild Arts guy was unwavering. Seeing that, Rhodes decided not to worry about it too much. Instead, he pressed on. What about the others? Other than him, the S-class wizards are Laxus, Mirajane, and Urza. She paused, before correcting herself. No, actually, there are only 3 now. Who's the strongest among them? Lockie shrugged. No idea. You've already seen Laxus and Urza. As for Mirajane, well, you probably won't see him. He rarely shows up, and as far as I know, the only person in the guild who's ever seen his real face is the master. Another mystery guy. Rhodes mentally added Mirajane's name to his list of intriguing people. But the real trouble was still Laxus. Rhodes couldn't help but think about how satisfying it would be to see someone teach the guild master's arrogant grandson a lesson. Laxus seriously needed to be humbled. That being said, Rhodes glanced at his current summons, Poro. Kenyan Scuttler Crab. Yet. That wasn't happening anytime soon. Chapter 20, Is there any pet that doesn't do housework? Ah, another busy day. Rhodes sighed as he stepped into his small home, stretching his sore muscles before taking a quick cold shower. Thankfully, it was summer. Ever since he started using magic, he could feel his body becoming stronger. Otherwise, he wasn't sure if he'd have adapted so quickly. He had considered taking a hot bath, but since he didn't have any magical heating equipment, boiling water with firewood sounded like too much trouble. At first, he thought about investing in a magic-powered water heater, but after asking about the price, he decided to tough it out at least until winter became unbearable. After helping Warm bathe, Rhodes found himself missing the washing machines back at his school. Just 2 coins, and the job was done. Hand-washing clothes was slow, tedious, and utterly boring. No phone to pass the time, no videos to watch, nothing. The only thing he could do was use the old-fashioned, hand-cranked phonograph in his room. At first, he found the experience weird. But as the music played, a thought crossed his mind. This feels kind of stylish, like those rich guys in those 19th century movies. If only the record collection wasn't such a bizarre mix of pop, rock, and classical music. Swish, swish, swish. The washboard leaned against the basin, and Rhodes rubbed the wet fabric rhythmically to the music, creating small, white foamy bubbles. He wasn't particularly good at using this old-fashioned method, but the repetitive motion and the gentle splashing were surprisingly relaxing. Meanwhile, Warm had been staring at the bag of detergent for a while, curiosity shining in his big, round eyes. Finally, unable to resist any longer. Lick. Followed by a long, slow drag of his tongue against the powdery substance. 1 second later. His face twisted in pure horror, and he violently spat out a mouthful of white powder. Are you an idiot? Rhodes knocked Warm on the head and dumped him into the sink. Go rinse your mouth, genius. Warm flailed around, but obediently started gargling with water. After finishing the laundry and hanging his clothes on the tiny balcony, Rhodes finally noticed a few potted plants sitting there. One looked like a succulent, while 2 others resembled orchids. The soil was visibly dry, a clear sign that they had been neglected for the past couple of days. Looks like I have a few more lives to take care of now, great. Sighing, he grabbed the nearby spray bottle, filled it with water, and gave the thirsty plants a well-deserved drink. As tiny droplets glistened on their leaves, soaking into the soil, Rhodes could almost feel their vitality returning. Without thinking, he muttered to himself. All right, you'll be called Tatsuya. You Ren. And you well, in this other world, it seems Dad will have to take care of you 3. Warm, watching from the side, tilted his head. Something about Rhodes' expression made him feel that his master wasn't all that happy about this. Why are you making that face? Rhodes put down the spray bottle and picked up Warm, holding him up at eye level. Go clean up the mess you just made. Warm blinked in shock. Wait, wasn't he supposed to be a pet? How could his master expect him to clean the floor? Don't look at me like that. What kind of pet doesn't help with chores? Before Warm could protest, Rhodes tossed him into the laundry room. You're responsible for cleaning up whatever you messed up. Warm sat there, staring down at his tiny paws. How was I supposed to clean anything with these? Of course, that wasn't Rhodes' problem to solve. Warm was smart enough to understand human language, he'd figure it out somehow. However, as Rhodes thought about it, he started getting annoyed. Why does Warm, a creature from the howling abyss, automatically understand the language here, but I have to struggle to learn it? Couldn't Mr. Hibiki's language pack be shared? Grumbling, Rhodes sat at his desk and opened the book he'd brought back from the guild. It was a history book. He wasn't exactly excited about it, but he figured it was important to understand the world he was living in. To make studying easier, Levy had even lent him a pair of magic-enhanced glasses. These weren't just any ordinary reading glasses, they were enchanted. At their fastest setting, they could accelerate reading speed up to 32 times. In other words, 1 minute of reading would be like studying for half an hour. Rhodes felt like his time had finally come. Even if he hated history, he could push through a few minutes, right? 1 minute later. Bang! The book slammed shut as its spine hit the desk with a loud thud. The noise startled Rhodes awake. He'd dozed off. He had completely miscalculated. Sure, the reading time was shortened, but the amount of content was still the same. And if he wasn't interested before, speed reading didn't magically make history exciting. Even with magic tools, history books are still history books. Rhodes sighed in frustration. Some people, like Hibiki, had magic that could directly transfer knowledge into a person's mind. Now that was a magic Rhodes could get behind. Or better yet, he could just listen to someone like Levy tell historical stories. After all, the way she described things made them sound so much more interesting. All right, let's start the day with 50 push UPS. Rhodes dropped to the ground and managed 30 in one go before his arms started trembling. Damn, this is harder than I thought. If you want to increase your magic power quickly, you can't just meditate, Master Makarov had told him. Your body needs training too, Or else, you'll regret it. Rhodes had a feeling that when the old man said regret it, he wasn't talking about missions. He was probably talking about surviving inside the guild itself. I mean, I don't even like fighting, Rhodes thought. But after watching how chaotic things get in the guild every day, it's only a matter of time before I get dragged into something. Even the girls in Fairy Tale were absurdly strong. And if Natsu or Grey ever punched him by accident, forget it, he didn't even want to think about it. Rhodes gritted his teeth and pushed on. To increase my magic power. One more push-up. To avoid getting beaten up. Another. To be strong enough to fight back if I do get hit. Another. Wait, why was this starting to sound more like survival training? For now, Rhodes' priorities were simple. Exercise to improve his physical strength. Meditate to refine his magic. Read to understand the world better. That last part, though, was a struggle. Magic-related books were fine, but history and geography? Absolute pain. Maybe I should check if there are any newspapers or magazines in town, he thought. Something lighter than ancient history textbooks might help him keep up with current events. The morning sky was overcast, cloudy but not rainy. Today, Rhodes decided to go to work in style. Riding a scuttle crab. As soon as the massive dark green crab emerged from the street, it immediately turned heads. The neighbors froze, staring at the unusual sight. As the scuttle crab started moving through the streets with Rhodes riding on its back, the initial panic quickly faded. Oh, it's a mount. Looks weird, but kinda cool. Wait, isn't that a crab? Why isn't it walking sideways? Hey, isn't that guy from Fairy Tale? Must be a newbie. Another restless one, hey. A few sharp-eyed onlookers spotted the blue Fairy Tale emblem on Rhodes' arm as the wind lifted the sleeves of his shirt. At this point, seeing something strange on Magnolia's streets wasn't unusual. But if it came from Fairy Tale? Well, that explained everything. Unbeknownst to Rhodes, the emblem on his arm was providing him with a certain level of understanding from the townsfolk. After all, Fairy Tale wizards were notorious for their eccentricities. This was nothing compared to some of the chaotic things they'd seen before. Rhodes, gripping the scuttle crab's long tentacles like motorcycle handlebars, could only hear the wind rushing past. Moments later, it skidded to a stop right in front of the guild. It was less than a kilometer away, so the ride was incredibly short. Brushing his wind-blown hair back into place, Rhodes sighed. At least this thing has autopilot. If it didn't, he was 90% sure he would have plowed through a few pedestrians. Even so, he still wasn't convinced this scuttle crab was all that safe when running at full speed.
Thanks for listening.